Chair of Finance and Operations, Representative Paulette Woods. Paulette, the floor is yours.
Good evening, everyone. For Finance and Ops, we are going to have a presentation from Richard on the problems that we're incurring with the financial aid, this governor withholding funds for us. And also we're going to have a little bit of discussion on some problems with grant funding. So Jeff, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Mike Glucci, could you put the presentation up, please? Okay, thank you. So I sent out, good evening, board members. I sent to everyone a couple hours ago this presentation, and I'm just going to go through the slides. I'm hoping to hold questions until the end because I think a lot of these slides tend to build on each other, and I think questions you might have at the beginning will be answered a couple slides later. And I'm hoping to get through it, and then then we can go over questions at that point. Dr. Cash asked me to start with this particular slide, this 2021 budget scenarios, just to remind everyone of where we were back in May when we adopted our budget. As you recall, Dr. Cash went over several times sort of the survivable, devastating, and unrecoverable budget scenario possibilities that might exist. And what the budget that was presented to and adopted by the board was what was considered the survivable budget that maintained pretty much everything, not significant cuts like some of our peer districts have had to do, and it also absorbed the $46.4 million reduction in state aid with some backfill from federal aid. But still, that's a significant reduction in state aid, considering that we have been on the receiving end of increases of roughly $20 million a year for the better part of about 10 years. So that's that's the budget that was adopted by the board. Now, the exact dollar amounts that you might say you'd go from devastating to unrecoverable, the superintendent kind of mentioned, $150 million is that range that when you cross from that devastating into unrecoverable. However, any cuts beyond what we've already had cut from the state in our adopted budget really put us into a devastating budget scenario where we're going to have to make reductions. And that's really what we want to show in this initial slide. We may be on the cusp of bypassing devastating right into unrecoverable, depending on what the state ultimately does. So that's that slide. Mike, could you move to the next slide, please? So there's a lot on this slide, and I'm just going to kind of run down it. A quick update on where the state is, and you've probably all seen this in the news or in Governor Cuomo press conferences. New York State, they've reported that their tax receipts through the first 4 months of the year, that's April through July, are down $3 billion or about 10.2%. The biggest pieces of the state income revenues are personal income taxes, which are down 6.8%, and sales taxes down 23.1%. And that was just recently announced about a couple weeks ago where they were. The state has begun to withhold 20% of most aid payments due to localities. That also includes school districts. A few weeks ago, August 13th, I had sent that memo out after it was announced that the excess cost aid, that's special education reimbursement related aid, that the state was going to withhold 3.1 million of our roughly 15.5 million payment that was due in August. So it has now begun these aid deductions from the state. We understand as well that this is probably going to go into grant reimbursements as well. They're not making any distinction at this point between general fund, grants fund. That excess cost aid is actually a prior year revenue, the state is in a terrible cash crunch right now. They need cash just to pay necessary bills, and one of the ways they're doing that is withholding funds from towns, cities, counties, school districts, and so forth. So that's what's happening right now. The early part of the year, we don't have a lot of aid coming in, and that does buy a little bit of time, but you know, that's not going to last forever. The state has indicated as well on that same communication about the withholding that if there is not significant federal aid, and in the short term, these 20% withholdings, because right now they haven't said they're going to cut, they're just holding the money back. They may become permanent. And the Division of Budget at last word was planning at the earliest to submit a reduction plan to the legislature at the end of September, which means at that point, and the governor's been announcing this for several months, that these 20% reductions are what it's going to take to make the state budget balance. And it could be as soon as the end of September that they may bring to the legislature a reduction plan. The plan could be done in phases. You know, we know that it appears likely, or perhaps more likely, that federal aid might come to cities or states and so forth, which could be passed down to school districts and cities and towns. Perhaps after the next election. You're looking at more than halfway through our fiscal year before we may even know that. So the next big thing is really waiting for what the state is going to, what the State Division of Budget is going to do in terms of a plan to the legislature. We think it's important that the state knows what 20% will do to the Buffalo City School District, and that's the next point on here. 20% reduction in, this is general fund only, would result in, for the district, $197.6 million deficit in 2021. And that's a $50 million budgeted deficit. That's our survivable budget, which included a deficit to help fund some of those fund positions and so forth, plus $147.6 million in state aid loss. And that's 20% of general fund only state aid. A sub-bullet that I have under there is that the state right now, they're withholding from all payments, not just the general fund. They're touching everything, including grants and so forth. So 20% of all payments, and that also includes there's federal payments in there that pass through the state, that the state may hold for a period of time, depending on cash flow situations. And that could be 176.2 million. So 147.6 million is the general fund 20% aid cut. 176.2 million would essentially mean, and that's the maximum I think it could possibly be at 20%, everything that flows through the state, whether it be state or federal funding. These state cuts, it's the final point on here, they'll cast the district into either a devastating or, if not, recoverable budget scenario. That's the reality of what this 20% would do. And that's not just for us, that would impact many other school districts, cities, towns, governments everywhere. And we're also seeing it across the country. A lot of school districts right now, I think out in California, are dealing with 30% aid reductions. And this is very significant. Next slide, please, Mike. So just to take a step back, you know, this was rather timely. The New York State Comptroller's Office provides trainings periodically, and I usually try to jump on these trainings, and I'm sure it's not coincidence that this particular training that was recently offered was managing your budget in times of fiscal stress. And very high level points, but they're very relevant to how I think the district operates now, because we've been in trouble in the past, and systems are in place that allow us to track. We track cash flow. all the time. Every month we track our spending. We do quarterly projections. We do a lot of things that a lot of governments do not do. And some of that ties into best practices that the comptroller has. So I'll just kind of read these off real quick, because these are all things that we'll be looking at, and a few things I'll go over in the next slide. So one thing they talk about is declaring a spending moratorium, and that's to buy time. That doesn't mean you stop paying payroll, vendors, necessary things, but it usually means you stop doing transfers, stop adding new things. You don't necessarily enter into new contracts. We maintain status quo, buy some time for management to actually come up with a plan to figure out how to deal with the crisis. Prepare cash flow forecasts. That's very important. One of the things that could get us into trouble right away is if we can't pay our bills. So we do cash flow. Board members are very familiar with our cash flow because we've talked about it in conjunction with how that interplays with the city. So cash flow is very important because we have to make sure that we have cash to pay our projected bills. And if not, we may have to take actions going forward to do that. Review revenue and expenditure assumptions using what-if scenarios. And I'll get into a little bit of that in a couple slides, but we know right now the what-if scenarios on the revenue side really are dictated by the state, and that 20% possibility of cuts. Expenditure side, we have to look at, depending on what level of revenue cuts, what type of reductions in expenditures might we have to make to maintain cash flow and to not deplete fund balance. Develop a budget remediation plan. This is really where management has to get together and come up with a plan and bring that to the board. Number 5, modify your budget and multi-year, so 4-year, in our case, financial plans. The control board is going to ask us very shortly for documents surrounding this. So whatever budget modifications we make, they're also going to ask, how do these things play out over multiple years under different scenarios? So that plan that we come up with has to also look out a couple years. And it's not necessarily possible to know what's going to happen 4 years from now, but we're and I've got the last little point on this slide. We're a couple months. We're only a couple months away from planning for next year's budget. That's how quickly this goes. Number 6, continue monitoring your budget monthly. So we will be looking at our budget, doing projections every month, looking for accounts that appear to be that might be trending over what we had predicted, and may have to circle back to an earlier point on here, depending on how that goes. And then the last point they have on here is if your fiscal situation continues to deteriorate, and additional cuts will not produce sufficient savings to balance the budget, then at that point, you may have to consider last resort options such as deficit borrowing or unrestricted fund balance usage. And those things, those are both one-time events, and all they do really is buy you a little bit of time. But we have to, we have to find out what ultimately is going to come down from the state, and then go through this process. And again, the very last point I have on here is attend to next year's budget, because we're very close to the start of that. We need to make sure that we have good assumptions in terms of what might happen with that. So next slide, please, Mike. State aid reduction impact on cash flow. So we prepare an annual cash flow. The board members see that when we do our quarterly reports and the monthly reporting. You'll see a page that shows our cash flow. So we prepare every year, and also with the 4-year financial plan, we prepare a cash flow statement that shows all projected revenues and expenditures. It's based on our budget. It's based on actual revenues that we project, charter school payments that we project, salaries, and so forth. Generally we try to be conservative on this as well, because cash flow, the impact of cash flow is we have to make sure that we have sufficient funds at all time to pay for necessary spending that we have, namely vendors, charter schools, salaries, things like that. This cash flow, and what you'll see in there, you'll see 12 months of the year. You'll see originally projected month-end cash flow. And then below it, I have assuming that 20% of all payments are held by the state. So in July, ending cash flow was 203.8. If the state held 20% of all projected payments, that would reduce our month-end balance by 1.5 million. By August, you'll see that that number grows to 5.8. September, it grows to 19.2 million. And so on. And that would go throughout the entire year until you get to the end of the year, at which, in the worst case scenario, and that's what this is, this particular cash flow is used trying to determine a worst case scenario for us, that we could have our cash flow 176.2 million lower than we initially projected. I'm not going to read through all the notes on here, but the ABC notes, I think, are probably the most important ones that we'd want to look at. That note applies to March, April, May, and June. So in those months, based on, and I don't show it weekly here, but if I broke it out by week, in each of those months, most of our aid comes at the last day of the month, which means that during the month, we're spending on vendors and payroll and so forth, and we're likely to go below zero each month under this scenario. So we would need either to probably borrow from March through the rest of the year. And again, this is on the assumption that there are no corresponding expenditure reductions. But this is our worst case scenario, but it's something we have to look at first to understand what the impact of these state aid reductions could do. So one, looking at it, borrowing cash March through June. A year-end balance, number B, I have is that anytime, if you look at our cash flow, if it doesn't end the year over 100 million, we will have to borrow during the next fiscal year. So we would have to do a revenue anticipation note in order to cover, most likely by November, December timeframe typically is when we're kind of at our lowest cash flow, that we would have to borrow funds during the year if we end the year below 100 million. And this projection has us at about 38.2 million. C, I want to point out that May is the lowest cash point here, and 16.2 million at the end of the month. And just to compare, just to get an understanding, 16.2 million sounds like a lot of money, but one payroll is 18 million, and one charter school disbursement is 21 million. And that's two of our biggest type of payments that go out. But that's when you're down to 16 million in cash at the end of any given month, you're basically that's sort of the equivalent of being paycheck to paycheck, in which we'd probably again we'd have to be borrowing. So the impact on the cash flow is potentially significant if no changes are made on the expenditure side. I'll share this information as well with the city of Buffalo, because our cash balances get combined, and that would determine if a collective borrowing is needed for both entities. So that's important information that the city needs to have. Next slide, please, Mike. So this document with all the colors here it's actually a snippet out of a spreadsheet that I did, and we talked a little bit ago budget scenarios. So one of the first things the superintendent asked me is, all right, what does this mean? If the state says they're going to cut aid by 20%, what does that mean? And what I did is I put together 4 possible scenarios that I think would run the range of the best case scenario to worst case scenario under thinking about a 20% aid cut. Now we don't know that it couldn't get worse than this, but I'm hopeful that 20% is as bad as it gets. In this particular document, what I did is I put a scenario in for a 10% foundation aid cut. Maybe the state doesn't have to cut 20%, and maybe they can limit it to foundation aid only, and none of the other aid types would get cut. That's A, where I have in green. A 20% foundation aid cut would be, that would be about 108.8 million, and that's in yellow. A 20% general fund aid cut is alternative or scenario C. That's that $147.6 million reduction in revenues. And D is 20% of all payments that go through the state being cut. So somewhere, we'll probably fall somewhere within this range. And from all indicators at this point are that scenario C, a 20% aid cut, hopefully just in the general fund, would be the scenario. So what I have shown here is that for in each of these scenarios in the middle of the page, you'll see A, B, C, D next to each other, right below a 20, 20, 21. And if you start following down those individual columns, you'll see budgeted revenues of 904.7 million. Then you'll see what the state aid reductions are. You can ignore the first blue column or the first blue row about restoration. Below that, you'll see budgeted expenditures, 954.7. Again, that's right off of our budget. Additional increases, we haven't really talked about whether or not there's additional increases that might be necessary. And district budget expenditure reductions. So I don't show that in this middle section, but essentially a 10% foundation aid cut would push our deficit up to 104.4 million. Fund balance would drop down to 149.2 million. Scenario B, 20% foundation aid cut. You would have a state aid reduction of $108.8 million. Our deficit this year would balloon to 158.8 million, and fund balance at the end of the year would be $94.8 million. That gets us sort of into the danger zone. Scenario C, 20% general fund, all general fund state aid cuts, 20% would be a $147.6 million reduction in revenue. The deficit would balloon up to 197.6 million. Fund balance at the end of the year would be $56 million. Scenario D, 176.2 million. That would provide or push us to a deficit of 226.2 million and 27.4 million fund balance at the end of the year, essentially insolvent, if no other actions are taken. So those are the scenarios purely from a revenue perspective of what could happen to our revenue. And again, C, well, actually D is what the state is doing right now. From my understanding, they're withholding 20% of all payments that come to the district. My assumption is that they'll recognize that withholding grants is very problematic because that impacts multiple years, multiple funds. I assume they would limit it to the general fund or actually cut grants. They would cut the grants, not just reduce our reimbursement. In any event, this little spreadsheet that I have, and this can be altered, can be changed, and I've run a bunch of different little scenarios out of here, but this is where I'll talk about scenarios. So on the right-hand side, you'll see multi-year projections. And in this case, towards the bottom of the page, where I have these little projection models, I put several inputs that we have. So the input is, what aid cut scenario is it? In this case, I put in aid cut scenario C, which is 147.6 million reduction. How many years will it take to restore those aid cuts? I would imagine probably no fewer than 5 years. When the state makes cuts, historically, it's taken 5-6 years to get back to where we were. So if you take an aid cut and then you plan that you're going to, the state's going to restore it over 5 years, that does start to bring your revenues back up. And that's that future year restoration row that I have in here showing revenues coming back to the district in future years. But in this particular case, if we're in a situation where we have a $147.6 million reduction in state aid, we would, and we made expenditure reductions, one-time expenditure reductions. Let's say hypothetically that is transportation of $50 million. You would still need to find recurring expenditure reduction of $100 million just to maintain, not to put yourself in a trajectory where you will run out of fund balance. So in this particular scenario here, and this is the type of thing that we'll have to do, is to try and understand, guess what the state's going to do. Eventually the state will tell us what the reduction is going to be, and that will firm up the revenue side. And then we have to get to business looking at everything, the entire budget, top to bottom, find waste where there is, find where we can find savings where there is. We would have to look at everything, and this will give us some sort of idea of how much we would have to find and over how many years we would have to find it, in order to be in a position where we do not go, where we do not go and have a negative fund balance, essentially go insolvent in a very short period of time. So this is very serious, the situation that we're in right now. And again, in this particular scenario, we would have to find one-time reductions of 50 million and recurring reductions of 100 million, just to maintain, after 2 full years, or after the 3rd year, around $70 million in fund balance, which is that. And again, that's dangerously low, that level of fund balance. That you normally you don't want to go much lower than that, because you run out of cash. Then you're borrowing just to be able to pay your bills, and then you have to compound it that you've got interest. Now you're paying $million or several $million a year in interest, and you're having to take next year's state aid to pay something that you borrowed, to pay a prior year cost. So these types of scenarios can be very difficult. But it's important to let everybody know that significant revenue reductions will necessitate significant expenditure reductions. And in my time here, even going back to the last, at the end of the last recession, it was never, we were never looking at reductions like 20%. And this is very significant, but that's what the state's looking at in terms of how they can maintain their own solvency. So there's a lot in this slide, I know, but this is sort of just a real quick and dirty way of us being able to figure out, under different scenarios, what it would take to maintain certain levels of fund balance, what would happen in a relatively short period of time if we did or did not, make reductions, and again, on the revenue side. So. If you assume that the state cuts 20% of our aid in the general fund and pays it back over 5 years, that means that they're increasing our revenues just for that $30 million a year. $30 million a year during a recession is not likely, especially since a lot of what the state would be getting would be federal aid. So that, again, that just gives you, I think, an idea. And all these slides really are around that, of just making sure to make it clear to everybody how this impacts us, particularly the district, because we're 85% funded by the state. Mike, could you go to the next slide, please? This slide I've used forever, and it shows a historical trend and future projections of revenues and expenditures in the general fund. And red are expenditures, green are the revenues, and you'll see that there's a purple line, a green line, and a blue line, and they all start from the same point. So essentially, from 1920 into 2021, we had predicted, and based on history, we were right to do so, that revenues and expenditures would be pretty well matched. We were pretty much in a structurally sound position. And then you'll see that there's one really, really big two-sided arrow, a smaller one, and then there's a teeny little guy in gray. And that's what's happened. That little guy in gray is where we were about a year ago. That smaller double-sided arrow that says gap on it, that was the gap that was in our adopted budget. That big arrow is showing you what the state reductions would be at 20% of general fund, O&M fund is general fund revenue. You'll see it's a precipitous drop-off. It almost pushes us back 8 or 9 years. All the work that's been done over the last several years, improving the improved results that we've seen, the equity, everything like that, that puts all of that at risk. And if you look at that purple line, so you'll see that I'm predicting in future years a pretty substantial bump of state aid to restore that. That is by no means assured. Typically when in years past, when state aid gets cut, it stays cut for about 4 years because there's generally a cut in the initial year. There's usually some federal money. So we have federal aid this year. I would not be shocked if we got federal aid a year from now. But that federal aid is one-time aid, and that goes away as well. And that's why flat revenues oftentimes is what happens in situations like this. So I may be aggressive by showing a spike back on that purple line back upwards. But any way you look at it, we're looking at revenues substantially below expenditures. Based on the current information that we have. This puts us into a devastating situation. And the notes that I have on the side of this slide, without significant recurring district spending reductions, we'll be in a negative fund balance position in the next fiscal year. Under any scenario where 20% of foundation aid, all general fund aid, or all aid, irrespective, we'd go below negative without making significant reductions on the other side. Next slide, please, Mike. This slide I present quite frequently when we do our budget, and this really just kind of goes to point out, the main driver that we have for costs is our staff. Half of what we do is staffing costs, staffing related, salaries and benefits, and that's just a fact. That's how it is. That's how you educate students. We have seen substantial general fund growth of 720 positions. From 14-15 through 19-20. So this slide, again, I copied it, digit for digit out of the May 6th budget presentation because it's still very relevant now. But that just shows you where we've gone, and none of this. What's happening with our revenue now is not because of student counts dropping. This is the state not being able to fund the formulas as they exist. So it's sort of a double whammy that, we have seen, we saw the charter presentations. Those charter schools always say, we're only going to take 1% here, 1% there. Well, if you do that 20 times, that's 20%. And that's, that's the reality of it. And our student counts are dropping. There is no doubt about that. And now we're dealing with the state having less resources to fund all governments, us included. So again, this just shows you roughly by bargaining unit, the FTE counts, and the dollar amount of growth. So over that time, 720 staff persons in these various bargaining groups adds up to about $58.7 million. Next slide, please. This slide again, and I know I'm repeating myself, but it looks at things a little bit different. There's two main sections in here. At the very top, I'm just looking at the general fund budget, and I summarized it about as summarized as you can get it. Row number 1, salary, hourly, and employee benefits, $470.7 million. That's half of our general fund budget is salary and staff related. The next point, number 2, this is where it's, this is maybe not as known to folks, but we have a lot of fixed costs. The largest of which are retiree health insurance, debt service, charter school payments. We don't have control over charter school payments. We've got agency payments for students in agency settings, and we also have things like rent and so forth. That's 37% of our budget that is essentially fixed. There's not a lot we can do to control that right now. These are things that are primarily outside of our own control. 3 is transportation. The contracts and fuel. Salaries are in line 1, but the various contracts that we have and fuel costs is about $58.4 million. That's 6% of our budget. And then the last 2, I have 4A and 4B. That's really everything else. But I did kind of break it out a little bit into facility costs. So engineers, custodians, utilities, repairs is about $31 million. And everything else, so that's all of our other contracts, other operational costs, other instructional costs, textbooks, instructional software, that type of stuff, $41.2 million. So, you know, we're salary driven and fixed cost driven, and a lot of the things, you know, if a lot of the things that come to mind first when we're looking at budgets, and these are things we have to look at, but a lot of the things that people would think about that we might be able to reduce are in, you know, 4A, 4B. There's not enough spent in that entire area to cover the type of deficits that we're dealing with. And that's why it's important, this next little section on this slide, to show hypothetical savings relative to reductions in force. And you know, no one likes to look at stuff like this, but it's certainly something that we need to at least understand what it looks like. And what I've done on here is I just put hypothetical numbers of 100 full-time equivalent employees, 200, 400, 800, and 1,600. If you were to take all of our FTEs and lump them together, and I did the math on the whole thing, and if it works out to, if you were to lay off an employee right around now, the district would save about $60,000 per employee in this year. Next year, that would actually bump up to about $83,000 because that's things like unemployment would no longer be paid. Unemployment, I think right now, it's at least for half a year, or under CARES Act, it might be for 9 months. So that's up to 50% of any salary savings would be unemployment cost to the district. We're self-insured, so we pay those dollar for dollar. And you can see that for 100 FTEs, if you spread it out evenly amongst all bargaining units, that would save about $5.9 million of the budget this year in 2021. In 2022, that would go up to about $8.4 million. And so on down the line. I could have gone all the way to the very end, but I think the point's made that if you got to that red line where you've got 1,600, you're looking at 95 million in savings this year, 133.9 next year. These are all numbers that are within the range of the potential aid reduction that we're looking at. The right-hand side of that little chart, I show what would each of those FTE reductions in force look like if you spread it out evenly among all the bargaining units. And that's arbitrary to say that it could be perfectly even across them, but for 167 teachers, 5 BCSA members, 8 PECTA members, 16 BEST members, 1 exempt, and for trades 264 and 409, the engineers, that would be 3 of them. And I scaled it up just to give an idea of what we're looking at. Again, this is not a proposal to make any given reductions, but it's important to know that. It's important to have this data so we know what the impact might be under various scenarios that could happen. So that's, in conclusion, that's really all the slides. I think most of them. If you want to go, well, I guess we can stay at this slide. But that's, that really summarizes what we're looking at right now. Again, we don't know, and it may be weeks. For all I know, it could be months until we know exactly what the state aid reductions are going to be. Right now, they've just indicated that they're going to be holding 20%, and that 20% could become permanent. That's really all we know right now. And we're now 2 months into our fiscal year. It won't be long until October 1st. 3 months will have been gone. We could be waiting months to find out what the state's doing, and then months after that to find out what on the federal side. All the while, we're moving along in our fiscal year, and getting closer and closer to the halfway point of January 1st. And by that point, we're also budgeting. We're budgeting for next year. We're starting that process. So I think at this point, I wanted to open it up for any questions or comments, and kind of take it from there.
Okay, do we have any questions?
Jeff, when you're summarizing that, you're saying to close the $100 million gap, the cut is 1,600 staff. I mean, yeah, 1,600 staff. That's what you're.
No.
To understand you much better if I can get familiar with the way you talk. I need your permission to help.
Did you hear?
Paula, I did hear your question. No, that is not what I'm saying. These are, again, on this slide, it's just showing numbers. It's hypothetical. Now, understand there are, we have to, and this is really what you need to lean on management to do, is that we have to come up with a plan for the board. And the last thing we want to do is reduce staff, but understanding that given the scale, that we can't be assured that there would be no reduction in force. But no, this is not, what you're looking at on this slide is not a proposal or a plan. It is literally just looking at numbers and showing you what the potential impact in terms of reduction in force would be for savings. So the district has a large vendor spend. There's many things that we need to look at in a very short period of time. The superintendent, I think, there's probably certain things that we want to do in a very short period of time, but he said he's looking to have by October, the very beginning of October, a real comprehensive plan of how we're going to deal with these various scenarios, and hopefully by then we'll have a little more insight into what it's going to be. But no, I'm not making any assertions as to any potential reduction at this point. I'm just showing you numbers.
Hey, Jeff, I have a few questions. Do any of your projections include any savings from busing or energy, or do they include any of the grants that we got either from the state or the county?
Yeah, so right now, this does not include, and the projection, like the projection model that we have, I do not have assumptions in there at this time for certain savings. So like, for instance, transportation is probably the simplest one to think about right now. We're in a scenario right now where it's unlikely we'll have transportation costs in the month of September. And that would work out to maybe roughly about $1 million. I did include, and Mike, maybe you could back up a couple slides to keep going. One more. Yeah, this slide here. So in this particular scenario that I was looking at, transportation is the most likely cost that, depending on how long we're remote and what type of model we do come back with when we come back for hybrid or however else it might look, that transportation significant savings could be there. Grants, there are, so the CARES, we just filed with the state, the CARES Act, the funding that we had, that was already included in our budget, but that was just filed on Monday. There are always new grants that get presented throughout the year. A couple weeks ago, or maybe it was last week, the county had, they had provided indication that they were going to provide funding for PPE to school districts. So that will be treated as a grant. It really is only going to cover supplemental type costs that we have. But as we all know, the costs of PPE, technology, and then even under different scenarios, busing, which I did not include as any type of increase, those, depending on what type of model, education model we're in, there could be significant costs related to that. We'll also have a FEMA claim. FEMA will cover other costs related to PPE, but again, that could be a year out. We just at this point don't know how the reimbursement's going to work, so we're working on that right now. At this point, I've sort of purposely not put any type of proposal for specific reductions or or other things beyond really just looking at what is the possible state aid reduction, because I don't want to get too far without doing this step. You can't take it to the next steps.
Well, one more question, Jeff. We can't be in this alone. Are you talking to other districts in the Big Five, how they're handling this?
Yeah, and so I'm on calls every week with the Council of Great City Schools, and we're dealing with we're all in the same boat. It's a little bit different based on how they're funded, but many districts right now are looking at everything. They're looking at everything that they spend dollars on. They're looking at how their funding may force their hand in terms of how they educate students this year. I've in looking at Rochester and Syracuse, they've both made announcements for layoffs recently. I've kind of followed them. They're both of them are not in as strong a cash position as we are. Things are a little more urgent, but for them, but it's the same for all of us. We're all, especially any district that is primarily state funded, we're all in the same boat. I'm not telling you anything that you wouldn't see in Rochester, you wouldn't see in Syracuse. It's just based on the scale of the individual districts is the only real difference that would change.
Thank you. Do any other board members have questions? Terrence, you're on mute.
Yes, I believe that President Cotman was up first.
Sharon, you have the floor.
Board member Hurd and Vice President Chutin. So, Jeff, do you sleep good at night?
Not really.
I know how you are. I'm just teasing you. So I guess when you said that we need to develop a budget remediation plan, what are you talking about? What does that look like?
Well, in its simplest form, it's a budget amendment or a series of budget amendments for the board that would change what's currently in our budget. So our current budget has revenues of $954.7 million, expenditures of $954.7, deficit of $50 million. So it would be to implement it, it would have to be in the form of an amendment that would alter our budget. The details of which obviously would be worked on over a period of time, and I suspect there may be a series of things that are done, and some of it may be dependent on what we find out. The state had announced that they were going to assess potential cuts to aid to localities 3 times during the year. So they're in the second assessment period right now. And then January 1st is their third period. So we also may be dealing with that. So I don't know how, because they can't predict the future either, the state. So I'm not sure exactly how that will all play out.
Okay, thank you. So city reported that they would be holding any money from us this year.
I'm sorry, the city?
Mm-hmm. Are we guaranteed their funds?
The city of Buffalo's cash flow does show in the second half of the year that they might go negative at some points in time. That's why it's important for me to convey to them that our cash flow could also be similarly low. And ultimately, if our cash is low, they have no ability to use that combined cash balance to avoid borrowing on their end. And that's why, again, it's critical that I work closely with the city to make sure our projections kind of work hand in hand and are continually updated to make sure that we don't get ourselves into any trouble.
Okay, so are we sure, based on reports that you've seen, that our money is at the balance that you have is definitely in the city's budget? I mean, in the bank?
Yes.
You're positive, you're comfortable with that?
Yeah, based on the cash flows, the city borrowed funds at the end of the year. I think they may be borrowing again shortly. They were in a positive cash position, and that was done in June, and I believe they continue to be at this point.
So the city is not going to reduce any money to us. So the 7 million we'll get from them, right?
I can't speak to what the city may or may not do depending on their own budget situation. There's a maintenance of effort requirement in state law. So the city, because the state doesn't want cities to abandon their big 5 districts, so they have maintenance of effort requirement that they're not able to reduce their budget and therefore rely on the state to fill it in. However, if the city is ever in a position where they have to reduce their budget, they could do corresponding reductions in aid to the school district, I believe. The city's current budget this year is, I think, flat. It's roughly flat with their prior year budget. We've never known anything but support from the city for that maintenance of effort. But I believe under the law, if the city was forced to reduce their aid, their own spending significantly, that they could, under the maintenance of effort, still reduce the aid to the district. But again, that's not anything they've given any indication for. And I know, I know the city strongly supports education. So I'd like to think that wouldn't happen.
Normally around this time, you present money or not spent and return it to the general fund. What's going on with that? Those monies, the money that we did not spend last year.
Yeah, on this particular slide, actually, you'll see it. So our audit just started. Well, actually, it actually didn't even start yet. I think the auditors are going to be here maybe later this week or next week, virtually, of course. And if you look at the current slide that's up, on the 1920 column, we have an estimate right now of a $30 million surplus of funds in the general fund that will increase fund balance to 253.6 million. So that's in this scenario. The actual results are not available yet, and they're still very much up in the air based on some of the things that are happening right now. The certain aid that we thought was going to be received in the 1920 year is being held up by the state right now. And we may have to reserve for it. So that number where I have an estimate of a surplus of 30 million is that may vary from that. We're about a month or month and a half away from knowing that number. And primarily that number, in large part, I haven't looked at it in a little while, but all the transportation savings we had in the last quarter of the year, unspent dollars, utilities were, I forget the exact number, they were below what we had projected. A lot of overtime and kind of hourly salaries were lower. So this year, that $30 million surplus, that's what we have projected right now. And that was a projection we made back in April. And this is pretty common too. That's another one of the things we talked about, that we were anticipating a surplus. And that's one of the reasons why the 2021 budget had a higher than normal deficit in it, because we were essentially pushing those dollars from the 1920 year into the 2021 year, not spending them now. We want to use them next year, and that was the kind of the philosophy behind using $50 million in fund balance during the 2021 budget.
Okay, all right. So you and I had a conversation where we were talking about a conversation about being creative and figuring out how to making money for our district by utilizing our services. Do you feel that it's necessary that a task force be put together for that purpose?
I thought, well, isn't that something that the revenue, the revenue subcommittee looks at, or?
The revenue subcommittee could look at it, but the revenue subcommittee, I don't have a problem with them looking at it, but I'm talking about what they would need would be additional support from people from each area of concentration as to what can they bring to the table to help, or what can they sell, or what can we market. Yes, we can use the ad hoc committee, but certainly there's a need to have additional people there, and this would be something that I would think that would definitely be being spearheaded by you in a time of need, because we do have the ability to offer certain resources. And as it stands right now, I probably have about 2 or 3 ideas that I think we can generate some funds for ourselves. My concern is that board members are not full-time employees. They don't have necessarily the amount of time that they can put into this, whereas a task force would be earmarked just for this purpose. And of course, board members who are on the finance ad hoc would be a part of it. But I think we're missing opportunity here, because there's a lot of opportunity to save money and to make money. And I guess the final thing I want to say is that in the past, when we've gone through hard times like this, things that we were in it was a resolution, and we froze hiring, we froze overtime, the creation of new positions, and we also just made sure that the board approved any staff for moving forward. And although, this may not be viewed by maybe the current administration as a popular idea, let's see, during that period of time, I think it was somewhere around 2015, 16, we did see that the overtime, that the work got done without overtime. We saw that we were able to eliminate waste in hiring. I mean, we are creating new jobs, descriptions and things like that, and the board has no idea that this is a new position, moving things in where we should be tightening what you would be doing your own budget, refrain from spending, don't go out often as you used to go out. You stay home and you have popcorn and you make your own pizza to save some money. So we need to get down the basics here. We need to talk about resolution in regards to hiring, overtime, and etc. And that needs to be a serious conversation. Chairman Woods, have that serious conversation about, in your experience, what have you done in the past when things like this have happened with the county? How were you able to cut costs and save some money? I think you bring that wisdom to the board. I appreciate your input on that.
Excuse me for one moment, President Cotman. I just want to say, because Dr. Cash has put a hold on central office hiring, and there's a process we have to go through for that in order to happen. So I don't want you to think that, Dr. Cash has not taken steps already. to curtail any of the hiring and the spending at central office.
Great. Now I want to see it done across the district too. So I appreciate, the central office piece, but I'm concerned about, because I think also at a time like this, and you may be able to better explain it than me, I think there's a need that we start doing time studies and seeing exactly how time is being spent. And is there a possibility that we have staff members who can be doing additional functions, particularly what I'm concerned about is under that Title I money, because I really think that some of those positions, and no disrespect to anyone, but I think some of those administrative positions can be combined for the work that and the cost that's being spent on hiring people to do those jobs. So I think there's a need to look at some things. I think the reason for a task force is that you bring people from outside of the district who are a part of the task force, who have had experience in this area, and who are not necessarily emotionally connected to people, and that they can do that. And so I am very concerned about not putting some controls in. Thank you. That's it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Mr. Hurd?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Petrucci. I know that I don't want to see jobs cut. I don't want to see people lose jobs and positions, for one. And I am concerned about the number of reported overtime that's been given throughout this district. And that's one thing that I agree with the President Cotman is to look at that as a board and as a district also. And I know Dr. Darren Brown Hall said that that Dr. Cash looked at central office and about the hiring processes. And I know there's been a lot of movement right now within our district. A lot of people have been moved around and assuming different positions. So I would like to see a report on that, who's been moved, because it's been, I know that we probably can get that the next board meeting, but before that, because if people are being hired.
I just want to know, what do you mean by being moved, Mr. Hurd?
Out of positions, if they're in one position, they get moved back to the building or a teaching position or office position somewhere else. So I heard of a few. I can't discuss people's names.
Oh yeah, no. Because all of those go through the board. So anything that happens like that, either someone has applied for, or if they revert to a previously held position, that all goes through the board. So that is in the board packet every time we have a board meeting.
But people have been moved. I mean, I don't want to get too deep into it right now, but people have been moved since the last board meeting, different positions. So that's what I was talking about. And also, we might have to look into I don't know if we at that area yet about putting a moratorium up against hiring or overtime right now, but I don't know where we at right now with that, looking at different fundings. I would like to ask about, I know Senator Chuck Schumer, I was on a call with him, and he spoke about money that's supposed to be allocated for the schools to help the schools out during this time period. I'd like to know where we at with that. Have anybody give a call? I did email the information to the district, who to contact with Chuck Schumer's office. He was also talking about the PPP grants, which maybe some of our agencies can apply for, that can help out with cost savings. And also, I know that the Federal Care Act through the county allocated some monies also for COVID to our district. I believe Mark Poloncarz just announced 15 million, for our district, and that money's, where that money's going, or how can we allocate that money, towards savings. So it's just a lot of grants and stuff I would like to see personally, to take a look at the grants that's available to the district, the grants that the district filed for, to see how we can try to close some of these gaps, and just look at our the ways that we're doing business, to see if some things that need to be adjusted. I'm not saying an overhaul or anything like that. I'm not going nowhere near that, but I'm just saying where we can save monies judiciously as a district, and just comb through a couple of things. I know that Jeff does a great job, putting these graphs together and getting the numbers together for us. But until I actually can look in the departments to see how the expenditure is going, they're numbers. And I know that we tend to round things off. I round things off to near, so I'm saying like we about $150, minus we're looking towards for our general budget, a general fund. So let's see where the money's at and how we can save, and be, judicially responsible as a district. I know you guys do a wonderful job doing that already. Just want a little more look into the workings of it.
Okay. And Terrence, thanks for those comments. And actually, the superintendent has really asked me, and he's told me this on most every occasion we meet, that he wants this to be, my full-time is dealing with this situation we're in right now, same with my staff, and wants us to look under every rock, around every corner, whatever we can do. And the same things that he always preaches: cost savings, cost avoidance, and revenue generation. Everything that we do now is really focused on those types of things. So that's kind of our full-time work, because we want to make this as painless. There's going to be pain, but painless as possible. And the superintendent's talked about it with us because he's been through this before. He's had huge deficits and gaps that he's had to deal with, and those are opportunities to look at being more efficient, and changing sometimes the way that we do things. So these are all things that we'll be looking at.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. Also, on top of that, I know the superintendent is very keen in this matter and had a lot of experience. But I want to look at our title monies also, see how it gets spent. I don't want to see our inner city youth programs get cut, or teaching or math coaches. We lose those opportunities because of the budget cut. Areas where we need it the most, especially during the COVID, where kids are not getting the full emphasis on education that they would in the classroom. So I would like to see how we can build on that, using our substitute teachers and teacher aides and teacher assistants, in this program to try to emphasize that and bring more tools to the homes. And so going on that, I don't want to see those cut, but I'd like to see how our title monies would be spent to allocate towards pushing more funds that way, and see how we can redistrict funds, during this COVID, because a lot of things we're not spending on. There's some things that we're not using right now inside of our buildings, but there's other things that that went up on, as far as things like masks and cleaning products, things like that. So I know that it's a balancing game right now, but let's see what we can do a little better at how we spend and how we look at our objectives. Thank you.
Yep, thanks.
So if there's any more questions, please let me know. The present options I have between my phone and the actual large screen here doesn't allow me to see who's raised their hands. So if someone can either physically raise their hand or speak up, I'll recognize you and you can have the floor. Yes, Paulette Woods, I see your hand waving. You have the floor, Miss Woods.
Specifically, that wanted to raise the question about the Title I, Title II, Title III funding. When we talk about the grants, the budget presentation, the sheet given in our budget, said that they were expecting $1,878,000 reduction in the Title I, II, and Title III. And everybody had their budget, and then when Keith went over grant, those specific grants, he said that the grants were not, the Title I, II, III programs were not cut of this 1.8, almost $2 million. He said that the awards were higher. So question is, we got an extra $1 million more in those grants. What happened, honey? And where is the grant sheet that tells us the reality of what the awards were? Because there were large changes, and that's opportunities for the board to have some input. So the bottom line is the board has priorities. The board has passed.
I want to take that tool back because it's $90. So I'm going to write with this meeting on.
Please mute your phone, Barry, please.
The board has priorities. The board has passed an equity amendment. The board has a priority bragging about CLRT and changing our curriculums. Pass all these minority hiring and expanding competition in our bid so we can get cheaper prices. So what I'm saying is we're supposed to have some direction and input in saying, hey, this is what we want funded to implement our priorities. And what I'm getting is that people received layoff notices, and it's in the key areas like CLRT, and the areas that the budget is the board has been directing that that's a priority, and we're not in the loop. We're not being given the opportunity to have input in the direction of funding priorities. Your budget speaks to your priorities. So I want to know what happened to Title I specifically. This $1.8 million didn't happen. That was not realized.
Paulette, I've asked the grants department to pull together because I want to be able to show the board a full analysis of all of our grants. I know we had a conversation the other day, and kind of hearkening back to when Keith presented to the board that in April we develop a grant budget, which is based on the best available information that we have, and then that's incorporated with the full budget. That's the board's not being asked to actually adopt that grants budget because each individual grant is actually awarded by the state. But with respect to Title I, and I haven't looked at the other title programs yet. Title I had a $27.4 million budget in the prior fiscal year. The amount I believe that was included in the budget this May was 26.5. The actual award was to 27.2 million. So I'm not sure the 1.8 that might include these other title programs. So I don't have that, but about $700,000 increase in the allocation. However, the piece you don't see about that is that these grants, the title grants, have carryover. And what carryover is, it's a little bit like fund balance, where if they had unspent dollars in prior years, those funds could be used in the next year. And that had been funding Title I for the last several years. The carryover in this upcoming Title I budget is estimated at $500,000 right now, which is down $2.5 million from the prior year. And essentially, what would have covered the ELT program, that carryover does not, at least as they are estimating at this point, does not cover that. And that was ultimately why several positions were not eliminated. They were moved to the general fund out of Title I. Reduced class size teachers, that it was a funding swap essentially, but they were moved to the general fund. And to my knowledge, there were no related reductions at all. The funding had just changed. It may make sense, and I know we've done this in the past, that a Title I presentation was provided to the board. I don't necessarily want to speak for them, whether they're willing to do that or not, but that might be a nice thing to look at. I don't know that grant as well as I do know the general fund, but I felt comfortable in asking questions on Title I that everything in there is a priority. They're all education bargain things. Much of it it's school allocations that go right to the school budgets, and ultimately the schools decide. But there isn't additional money that just magically appeared and could be used. But again, I do want to pull that overall budget together, and I think that might be a good quarterly thing to provide the board, showing this is what was in the adopted budget. Now, as these grants get awarded and the numbers get finalized with the state, we can update you with those, and you can see what goes up, what goes down. In instances where we find out after the fact that the state will allow us a carryover of an expiring grant, that would also be included in there. And that's good information. I think that's something that we should be providing to you at least quarterly so you can see that. We do provide a quarterly grant award report, but it doesn't put it all together. It's just a summary of each grant. So we will provide you additional reporting that I hope will answer a lot of your questions.
Jeff, I'm just specifically looking at what you gave us from the budget. Title I, Part, it says 19-20 budget, comparing it to, it was 27,955. Shows included in this year's budget, 2021, 26,458,754. That's a reduction of 1,440,000 in just that one line. And that dollars in just that one line was not cut. That did not lose $1 million on that line. So I'm actually you the material you gave me. So I'm not putting your numbers. I'm giving you the numbers you gave the board. I'm asking of that $1 million that is on this paper that was put in the budget, and they did not cut but 300,000 on that one line. That's $700,000, and we would like to know what happened to it, because if we're going to be saying we need to fund some things, move some things, save some things, then grant funds would be in a vehicle to that.
So what we'll do, Ms. Woods, as Jeff has stated, what we'll do is, because I know the consolidated app meeting just took place a couple of weeks ago. It was right after our CLRI district-wide meeting. So what we'll do is at the October work session under your finance and ops, we'll ask the director of Title I to come present, similar to how she did last year on each of the title budgets, so you can see them all. We can definitely do that, okay?
So can we make sure, I interject one thing on this. Can we make sure in the future that when a board meeting is going on, budgetary items are not being discussed? That Title I meeting was while we were in a board session. And I have a problem with that happening, because typically I would have been involved at that meeting. I would have been, we would have, Paulette and myself would have attended that meeting, but we couldn't be in two places at one time. I think there's a concern for me when we have certain meetings on board meetings that nights and involving parents.
It wasn't on the board meeting night, Mrs. Cotman.
It was on committee meeting night. We had something going on the board table that we could not attend.
It was Thursday, August 22nd. It was a Thursday night, and it began at 6 o'clock p.m. because we had the CLRI meeting prior to that. So I remember it was
correct. Something that either I couldn't attend it or whatever. And I'm trying to think, it was at a parent meeting that night or whatever, but there was something going on that I was torn between if I could be with this place or that. And I think the need that night might have been to just listen to what was going on the Facebook line. But I just know that what I want to see when you have that Title I want to see what percentage of the Title I's monies are being used to pay for salaries. That's what I want to see. And I want to see what percentage is making it to the children, because there appears to me that there's a large percentage of this money is just not being, my opinion, and I don't know if that to be the case, is not being funneled directly to the children. And I want to see what's going on with that, because I'm wondering if we cannot consolidate some administrative positions in those roles and start getting children more services. That's what I'm looking for. And I think that's what the board is basically saying, that we don't want to cut services that are going to impact children. We don't want someone coming in saying we want to cut $50,000 for track and for bowling when we feel that those are two very important things that our children should be doing. We don't want monies that are out there that are being used to pay adults when we can do some consolidating and maybe figure out a way to make sure that children receive more benefits. That's all. What happened with that meeting? I can remember that I was a little ticked off because I couldn't be in two places at the same time. I felt that it was important to listen or whatever I was doing. So I stand corrected if that's not the case. But I want you to know there was something going on in this district that night.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm going my.
Ms. Woods, do you have any other questions?
I'm just waiting to receive some information so we can actually do some governance. So thank you for what you provided today.
Okay. Because I'm just going to go through the list of down the participant list to see if anyone has any questions. Dr. Rivera, do you have any questions?
Not at this time.
Ms. Mercosi, do you have any questions?
No, I do not. Thank you.
Dr. Evans-Brown, do you have any questions? We can't hear you. Oh,
can you hear me now? Okay.
I can hear you now.
One of the questions I had was, it was similar to, I think, what Mr. Hurd was talking about. Recently, was some dollars that came through the Erie County Legislature marked polling cars. There was some money recently allocated to districts, and I wanted someone to expand on what that is, and that we received some of those funds.
I can speak a little bit to it. So in what I know is just what I had seen in the media, that Erie County had CARES funding that I think was specific for probably PPE related things, and that the county was going to allocate it to school districts in Erie County based on head count. And then I think also with a supplemental amount based on student poverty, perhaps. And I'm not sure the exact amount that will be allocated towards the district, but it could be in like the $3 or $4 million range. And from what I understood, it was for PPE related costs. But I've reached out to the grants department or forwarded it to the grants department because I'm not sure how we're going to receive that. If that may come via an actual grant that we would have to fill out an application for, or if it will be some sort of a direct award. But that's one of the items that I have on my desk right now as certainly something that would be much needed for the district.
Thank you. I'm glad you're on top of it.
I can reflect. Some of it was towards PP materials. Others was allocated for kids and families that were unable to provide good meals and provide free meals, which we already do. So I was wondering, if that money is going towards the meal program. We already get reimbursed by the state for that money, so that money be allocated other places. So that's really it's a lengthy conversation to be had about it and how that money be allocated, because does that money go to us and then we distribute it to charter schools also? So it's other ways to look at, to look into this money to see how we can utilize this money for its best purposes. It was $15 million as of right now, and each kid should receive at least $100 per student.
Thank you, Mr. Hurd. Any other questions, Dr. Brown? Okay. And then Ms. J, any questions?
No, I don't have any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Do we have anything else for the wise and talented Jeff Pritchard?
Are you going to be able to provide us a list of layoff positions, or do we have to ask HR for that, since everyone's saying they're not aware of the layoffs and the cuts? But we're getting calls about that, especially for CLRT program, which we've been bragging on. But my understanding is that that those positions were eliminated. 2 positions were eliminated, and also one person's going out on maternity leave. So there isn't going to be anybody to actually do this program we've been bragging about with culturally, linguistically relevant training.
And it's unfortunate, Ms. Woods, that rumors get to you and inaccurate information, and then that it's shared at a board work session where the public is watching. That is very unfortunate that would happen. So what I can do is update you about the CLRI, and disclosing that someone is going out on maternity leave, I don't think is appropriate either. So I can have a private conversation with you about that and what is appropriate, and we can discuss that outside of this, so I can make sure you have accurate information about that. Okay?
The layoffs is sufficient.
Okay. Any other questions? This was our sole topic under Finance and Ops. Darren, where are we at with our next presentation? Are they ready to go?
Yes, we're going to do a reopening overview for all of the board members, very similar to what we did for our parents in the back to school, but our superintendent conference days are underway. So if Mike Lucci can gear up, and I'll ask all of the presenters, because our chief academic officer, Amber Kelly, is presenting, our associate superintendent, David Hills, is presenting. There were questions last time about CTE, so our director of CTE, Rob Harris, is presenting. Myra Burden, our CTO, will be talking about device distribution. So we're going to move it right along. So Mike, if you can please load up the PowerPoint that I sent and have Ann Botticelli's PowerPoint geared up, just so that we can get through these presentations and board members can ask any questions that they may have.
Okay.
Board members, thank you for your time tonight on the finance side.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, Jen.
Jeff. Thank you, Jeff.
I'm going to grab a cup of coffee while they're loading up the slide presentation.
There we go. As soon as Mr. Petrucci gets back, I'll dive into this, and then I'll hand it over to our Chief Academic Officer, Ann Botticelli, and to David Hills, who's there, our Associate Superintendent of School Leadership Secondary.
Are we taking 5 till everybody gets set up?
I don't know that we need 5 because the PowerPoint is set up and ready to go. I think Mr. Petrucci was just refreshing his coffee.
Okay. It looks like nobody's job is easy, Dr. Brownhall.
Absolutely not. But the thing is, we keep plugging along because it's in the best interest of our kids, right? And so, yeah. As Pastor was saying, no, the Lord didn't say the road would be easy, but He will help us over it. So that's what we go on.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let-
You know, we need the
Absolutely.
words sometimes. We need the words sometimes.
We need it all the time. We have to stay prayerful, especially in this environment.
Oof.
Yeah.
I'm lighting
Amen.
candles.
I'm registering voters.
There we go.
Very nice. I was on a teleconference yesterday.
Yeah, we're registering kids starting at 16 years of age. We've been doing that all summer. They can register at the age of 16, so when they're 18, they can go ahead and vote.
Who in the district is responsible for the credit, the community credits that our children get?
When you say community credits, what do you mean, Mrs. Cotman?
Don't they have to have 30 credits or something to graduate or something for doing community work?
That's in their participation in government class. That's in participation in government. So that's under Mr. Brandy's department.
Okay.
Community
Now,
service.
That is that state grant? Does the state determine that?
I'm not sure. I can
Okay,
find
I'm
out.
okay. Thank you.
So, Mr. Pucciucci, let me know when you want to get started.
Let's just see. I was just waiting. I see Mr. Hill's smiling face. Who else do I see? Paulette. I think we're good to go. Why don't we get started then, Darren? Good evening. Welcome everybody to the Executive Affairs session. Tonight we are going to be covering the very topical matter of the Buffalo Public Schools reopening schools plan. I know that there's many questions out there. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Darren Brown Hall.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pucciucci, and welcome everyone, board members. We're before you again to talk about where our reopening plans are right now. Next slide, please, Mr. Lucci. So, next Tuesday, September 8th, is the first day for students. Teachers began yesterday, September 1st, with their superintendent conference days. So they have Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday of this week, 3 full days of professional development and time meeting with their building administrators in their school. Friday, September 4th, is designated as teacher setup day. That's a contractual requirement they get. So they're able to spend that time actually setting up their classrooms in the building, setting up their courses in Schoology, using that time to make sure that they're ready for students to begin their remote learning on Tuesday, September 8th. And I want board members to know, even though school will be starting for students on September 8th, the reopening committee and the subcommittees will continue meeting so that we can refine things along the way and then discuss how we will eventually transition to a hybrid model, because that is the ultimate goal, to get students back in the school building and in a hybrid model. So the reopening committees and subcommittees will still be meeting to discuss how that transition, that gradual transition will take place. Next slide, please. So right now, Ann Botticelli, our Chief Academic Officer, and David Hills, Associate Superintendent of School Leadership for Secondary, will discuss remote learning and what school day schedules will look like. So Mike, if we can transition over to Ann Botticelli's PowerPoint, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. So this is actually information we shared at our most recent parent meeting, but I thought it would be discussed with you as well. So in a remote learning environment, you've heard me talk about our learning management system, Schoology. Over the yesterday, today, and tomorrow, teachers are receiving training in Schoology. Many of them were already familiar with the platform, so they'll be taking a more advanced course. But we want to make sure everybody's familiar with the platform, because on day one, our students will be logging into Schoology. So again, our learning management system can house curriculum content. So there are many groups in Schoology. For example, I was just in the math group, And their teachers can post comments and ask questions and get answers for their questions, and the curriculum content is housed there. They can take that content and link it to student accounts so that students can see what they want them to see. They can link websites to student accounts, videos. They can put their virtual conference links there. Students and teachers can email one another, so you can give instant feedback to a student. Students can submit assignments through Schoology. Teachers can actually grade them and send feedback through Schoology. So as you can see, it's really a one-stop shop. During asynchronous learning time, students will go to their Schoology courses for each subject area, and there will be activities housed there or links to different platforms so that the student can access whatever instruction the teacher hopes that they will do during the asynchronous time. Our virtual conferencing platform, Microsoft Teams, will have a link housed in Schoology. So on day one, when a student goes to their Schoology course, they'll find a link to the Teams meeting if they are synchronous at that time. So that's a virtual meeting. Teachers can have whole group instruction. They can provide small group instruction. They can provide one-on-one tutoring. And when a student is experiencing asynchronous learning, a teacher will hold virtual office hours. So teachers are working continuously. Students may be working independently, or they may be coming into a teacher's office hours. You could go to the next slide, please, Mike. So I'm actually going to turn this over to Associate David Hills because he's going to talk to you a little bit about student schedules.
So as Chief Academic Officer Botticelli shared, there are two modes of learning for students and teachers: synchronous teaching and learning and asynchronous. The teacher will have an assigned period every day of instruction, and both teachers and students will experience a full day of teaching and learning. It will be the normal school day, 7 hours and 15 minutes with times built in, but the two modes of instruction. For synchronous, it simply means the teacher and the students are engaged at the same time. So if at 9 o'clock on Monday, they have a synchronous global studies class or a synchronous ELA class, the student and the teacher will both go through Schoology, open up the course folder, will click on the Teams link, and the teacher will see a live group of students, and the teacher will take in attendance in Infinite Campus just like normal. On an asynchronous day, the teacher will be holding office hours at that time. Hours might not be accurate. It's more office time or an office period. It's time where the teacher is available at the exact same time of the day where they would have been teaching synchronously, but they have prepared work for the students to do independently, but they're also giving students chance to stop in and have questions answered through Microsoft Teams. They're giving students a chance to maybe make appointments or to be pulled if they're struggling for a small group with the teacher. So asynchronous means the teacher is still connected through office hours, but the student has some discretion in where and when they do the work. They could do it later that day, but if they need to, they have an opportunity to connect with the teacher. When a student reflects asynchronous learning, the teacher will be there. The teachers will be doing one-to-one sessions. And Schoology has a lot of capability for communicating. So along with Microsoft Teams, the students can send messages to their teachers through Schoology. So they'll be using that if they're working asynchronously and it's after the teacher's school day has completed, and let's say it's 7 o'clock at night, let's say it's 10 o'clock at night, and a student is working on work that the teacher has prepared, or maybe even watching a video lesson that the teacher has left on Schoology. They can send a message to their teacher, and the teacher can respond at any time they log on to Schoology. So it allows for that communication continuous. The goal is that students will have opportunities for substantial contact every day with their teachers. I'll turn it back over to Chief Academic Officer Botticelli.
Great, thanks, Mike. Can you go to the next slide, please? So we know how important our parents are and how much their support of their students makes everything more successful. So we've been really strategically trying to reach out to families to make sure that they will be ready for day one. So we have a parent orientation to Schoology in multiple formats. There are videos on the website, and they're just about done being translated, and those will be sent out. But they show a parent how to log in from any number of devices. And they show a parent how to message a teacher, what it means to submit an assignment, and various other things that Schoology can do. There was a Facebook Live session that was recorded about a week ago, and our student technology leaders actually came onto the session and showed families how to access Schoology and all the capabilities of Schoology. They've been running, these same student leaders have been running virtual training opportunities throughout August. So a lot of families have logged in to learn more about Schoology. We've been really encouraging families to create parent accounts. So a new opportunity coming in September is a parent account for Schoology. We did not have access to this before for parents. So now they can go through the similar process that they do to log into Parent Portal and get permissions for Parent Portal, but it will let them shadow their student. So if I'm a parent of 4 students, I'll have one account and I'll be able to see each of my own students' accounts. I can see what work they've been assigned, and I can see what they have actually submitted. So it's a wonderful opportunity for me to get a better handle on what my student is doing in the classroom, and I can message teachers and get information. Parent Portal is our #1 place for parents to see grades. So we also strongly recommend that parents create Parent Portal accounts, and there you can also check on student attendance. We still maintain the helpline at 816-7100, and that will be going throughout the year. A lot of families have accessed the helpline. Right now, the best place to go for IT support is actually the new technology center down on South Park Avenue. But anyone can call there if they need support, if they just are looking to update their device, to switch a device. Maybe they're about to switch from an iPad to a laptop. That's the place to go, and they will also provide hotspots for families in need. Finally, we have started a family liaison project. So every building is assigning one liaison, so one staff member, to be a liaison to each family. We thought it would be the most convenient and most consistent way to reach family members. They can still contact the students' teachers directly. There's no issue with that whatsoever. But we thought it would be great for them to have one main point of contact. And that liaison will be reaching out to them at the beginning of the year to make sure that they have the devices they need, that they have hotspots if it's necessary, or other forms of Wi-Fi, and to provide any supports that they can. So we're sharing information with schools so that they have resources ready to support those families. And that liaison will continue to connect with that family throughout the course of the year. Next slide, please. Thank you. So on the first day, we've received this question a few times. It's really important that families know that they will log into Schoology to start the school year. So every teacher creates courses. So if I teach Algebra 1, I will create an Algebra 1 course for each of my periods, period 1, period 3, period 5, etc. And students will log into the appropriate section. Inside, they will find activities that they're being asked to do during their asynchronous time. And they will also find a link to the Teams meeting. So we wanted it to be simple for parents. Instead of having a lot of different platforms all over the place, everyone will log into Schoology, and within Schoology, they'll find the link to their synchronous Teams conference. So we thought that would be more streamlined for families. So during office hours, students would actually follow the same link. So again, less confusion. It's one link that serves for the same purpose, either office hours or the synchronous instruction. And during September, again, we're going to be contacting families. Our liaisons will be reaching out, and schools will reach out to have students pick up materials like math module books, novels for English classes, different resources that they might need to be successful in school this year. Thank you.
Are you done, Ann?
Yes, thank you.
All right, thank you very much. So, Mike, if you could switch back to my PowerPoint. And now we're going to actually welcome our Assistant Superintendent of Multilingual Education, Nadia Nashir, to talk about the supports we have in place for our multilingual families. And after Nadia, we'll actually have Assistant Superintendent Kim Holscher about the supports for special education families. So Mike, if you can go to the next PowerPoint slide, because that one is Nadia's, the next, if you can just flip right, there we go. Thank you very much. Welcome, Nadia.
Thank you, Dr. Brownhall. I hear an echo. Can you hear me?
I can. Someone's not muted, no matter how many times we say please mute, and no matter how many someone's still not muted. So if we can ask everyone to mute again, please. Go ahead, Nadia.
So I'm happy to be here to report what we've been working on in order to support our multilingual families. We meet with community leaders not only during our weekly reopening subcommittee, but we meet with them often. And what we heard early on when the devices were being distributed in the summer, that we needed to do something different. And so we worked with the dynamic IT department led by Myra Burden, and also Sarah Edwards had been really collaborative in supporting us in this endeavor. We dedicated 3 days only to multilingual families. And what that meant was we increased the language supports. So we had interpreters on site. We had, we used the interns, the student interns, who not only were tech savvy, many of them were multilingual learners themselves, so they were able to support. And we ensured before the families went home that they had their laptop and Wi-Fi set up. So they were confident once they got home that it would work. I know that Chief Academic Officer Botticelli talked about the translations, and so those have been recorded and will be released shortly. We also, for Schoology, they're ready to go. We're also going to be working on translating Microsoft Teams videos. Another big area for our division is language supports. And so we've worked with our vendors. We worked really closely with our far away vendors, our close vendors. We asked for more support, and they were wonderful in giving us additional support. For example, we have talking points, and I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with talking points, but it allows our parents to communicate with their children's teacher or principal in the language that they prefer. And then it allows the principal or the teacher to respond back in English, but then the parent gets it in their home language. And that has been transformational for us. We've also held virtual hours since June. What that means is we designate one day for an hour and a half where our families can drop in virtually. There would be a cultural resource specialist, a multilingual administrator, and an instructional coach to help with any homework or with any academic supports or even social supports, like whatever they needed, we were there, because that's a service that we offered pre-COVID. And so we wanted to continue some supports that our families appreciated. We have the help desk number, the helpline number that is dedicated only to multilingual families, because it removes all those barriers, right? Like press 1, for help desk, press 2 for ELA, press 3 for after school. And so what we did was we were able to have one number dedicated for multilingual families, and they would hear press 1 for Arabic, and then immediately the interpreter would come on and say, this is Nagam. If you have any questions, please voice turn it. We also, in working with Dr. Tanja Williams and Myra Burden, give our research specialist cell phones. That right before COVID, we sent out a flyer to families with pictures of each of the cultural resource specialists and contact information. And those numbers were desktop numbers, right? And so after COVID, we were able to find a way around that, linking their phone numbers to the phones. The other area is our reopening meetings. Again, we heard from our multilingual families, community leaders, that we needed to offer more. We needed to offer it in their specific language, meaning that we dedicated one day, sorry, not even one day, but like an hour for Spanish speakers. So we held that on August 25th and August 26th for a total of 6 meetings in our top languages. We also held 2 meetings with our community leaders and our community-based organizations. And what came out of that was they were ready to help us with anything. They were like, whatever you need, we will help. And community-based organizations would benefit from a the translate list for our families, making sure you have your Schoology password and username. So we're going to create a template for them to hold all those username and passwords. Make sure that your child goes to bed. So we also have a checklist of things to do right before the big day, which is next week. And so in summary, that is what we were able to support our multilingual families, and the work continues. Thank you, Dr. Brownhow.
Thank you very much. Nadia, we appreciate all that information and all you and your staff are doing for our multilingual families. Thank you very much. Mike, if we can go to the next slide, and we'll hear now from Assistant Superintendent of Special Education, Kim Holscher.
Good evening, everyone. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what we're doing for our students as well as what we're doing for our families. For our students, as we always do, we're going to make sure that during remote learning, they're receiving all the same supports that they do if they were in school. So what I mean by that is a student in an integrated co-teaching class would have the opportunity to work with the gen ed teacher as well as the special education teacher. So our special education teacher will be pulling small groups of students, meeting with them on virtually, as well as the teacher aide in the classrooms, in their special classrooms, will be pulling small groups of students to support them. We're going to make sure that all of our students are getting the specially designed instruction that they are required to get. So the accommodations and modifications to the curriculum will be made virtually, just as it would be as if they were in the classroom. Many of our students have assistive technology on their IEPs, so we're going to continue to make sure that that assistive technology is available to them. And that will happen by either making sure that equipment is brought to their home, which we did in the spring, or by having alternatives to that, such as showing them another way to access a computer or a calculator, for example. So some students may have something like a calculator on their IEP. We might not necessarily deliver that to their home, but we would have the teacher instruct them how to access a calculator on the computer. For related services, we are in the process of having a survey go out to parents. We've heard from about 1,300 of our parents, and there's probably right around 4,500 students who receive related services. We've heard from about 1,300 of our parents as to whether they would be interested in in-person services for related services, even if we are remote for all other instruction. So while we have not made a decision about that yet, we are in the gathering stages of the beginning stages of gathering information around that. We have set up office hours for all of our teachers. So if there's any questions they have about special ed students, teaching, how they can support their students, there will be a special education administrator available to them every morning of the week, Monday through Thursday from 8:30 to 9:30, or every afternoon, Monday through Thursday from 2:30 to 3:30. So there will be those opportunities for people to call in and talk to any of the administrators. Additionally, we did have a reopening meeting for our families back a couple weeks ago, and we also held a meeting for our students where we had about 20 special education students on a call, and we got their opinions and what their concerns were and what were they worried about coming back to school. What were their concerns? What were they looking forward to? And that was extremely insightful, and it was actually invaluable information. We are also keeping a list of all of the types of services that students would need. For example, besides the assistive technology, what types of equipment they need, making sure that we have that available, making sure that we are having the correct PPE available. So for example, a student who is getting speech, they may need a mask that has a clear mouth so that the speech teacher could see the sounds they're making and how their mouth is forming sounds. We're making sure that we are addressing the needs of students who have medical needs, who are medically fragile, or who may have sensory needs and can't wear a mask. So in that case, we may have a face shield available for that student, or some other sort of plexiglass divider or something to make sure that we're maintaining safety for the students as well as for the other staff members in the room. So we're working very diligently to make sure we're supporting our students, and we will continue to do that to make sure that we give them the best education possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that also. Next slide, please. At this time, we'll have our CTO, Myra Burton, talk about device distribution, connectivity, and the IT helpline. Myra?
Thank you, Dr. Brown. Good evening, board members. So as many of you probably are aware, we began device distribution for the 2021 school year on August 12th, and it is continuing through September 3rd and then all next week, and I'll give dates and times specific to that. Before we launched the distribution for this school year, parents were notified for pickup a date, a time via email, and U.S. postal mail, and school messenger phone calls. To date, as of this morning, over 26,000 students now have devices. Since August 12th, we've seen a continual increase in the number of parents coming to the center to pick up devices. Over the last few days, there have been upwards towards 500 parents and students picking up devices. Today, we believe that it was upwards near 1,000 devices that were distributed. As Ann Botticelli mentioned earlier, we're distributing the devices out of our new Center for Innovation, Technology, and Training that's located at 1515 South Park Avenue. The remaining times for pickup or support for our student devices, we had extended times today that ran until 6:30 p.m. Tomorrow, we are running distribution from 12 p.m. to 6:30 p.m. And then all next week, beginning September 8th through the 11th, we are running distribution from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. The center will be open daily with a focused time for support for our students and staff between the hours of 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. For internet access, we are still in conversation and consideration and negotiation with Spectrum. The Spectrum Stay Connected offer offers internet access to our student homes, and it is something that would be sponsored by the district. We are also in connection and conversation with the mayor's office, and they are assisting us with trying to finalize a deal or come to an agreement about the Spectrum offer. So there will be more information to come and share with that. In the meantime, hotspots are being distributed. If a parent or student expresses a need for a hotspot as they're picking up a device, we are accommodating them on the spot. However, to request a hotspot, and this is for students only, we're asking that a mobile hotspot request form be completed on our website at buffaloschools.org/hotspot request, or they may call 816-7100. Those hotspots are being distributed one per household and assigned to the oldest student in the household. When the hotspot is ready for pickup, parents will be notified via school messenger, a call, or a text message if they opt in, as well as letters. To date, I think we have distributed well over 1,000 hotspots, and this is from March forward. Within the period of time since we've been distributing devices, upwards near about 700 hotspots have been distributed, and we still have well over 2,000 hotspots in stock to complete that. The vendor that we're working with to distribute hotspots or to provide hotspots for us, there is about a 5-day turnaround time in increments of 1,500. So, for instance, if we were to place an order for about 1,500 hotspots, we would have those within 5 working days. We are also sharing information and links for support. As mentioned repeatedly, parents and students can call 816-7100, press option 1 for support with technology. We have Schoology videos that we have created, as Ann Botticelli mentioned earlier, with the use of our Student Technology Leader Program participants. They facilitated live virtual sessions demonstrating Schoology to our parents, and we've also developed videos that can be accessed via our website. We also, as I mentioned, had the hotspot request form, and we have also developed a student technology handbook that outlines proper use of the device, care and safety of the device, and just best practices, tips and tricks for a positive online remote learning experience. Thank you, Dr. Brownhall.
Thank you very much, Myra. Again, so much important information. So next we're going to have Robert Harris, who's our Director of CTE, present, because I know board members had questions about what CTE looks like in a remote environment. So I believe you have a PowerPoint, correct, Rob? Awesome.
Yes, sir. Good evening, board members. My name is Robert Harris, Director of CTE, or Career and Technical Education. We're dedicated to teaching students both industry and professional skills in a variety of technical areas, as well as support academic skills through cross-curricular integration and project-based learning. In any model, we will offer high-quality CTE programming by being able to adapt and remain flexible. So this is what you can expect in a fully virtual model for career and technical education. Next slide, please. The CTE standard is to offer high quality middle and high school programming, ensure that we have industry fundamentals and hands-on and project-based learning, and making sure that we have work-based learning, as well as industry and college partnership participation. Next slide, please. Just a reminder of what we have to offer for career and technical education programming. We have all of the middle school and high school programming. Our grades 7 and 8 for middle school have home and careers and intro to technology. Our high school programs boast 30 programs or more in a career-based, innovative high school programming. Those programs are anywhere from culinary arts to business administration to career and tech ed and IT industries. Next slide, please. As I was speaking about the fundamentals, we want to make sure that we are covering industry fundamentals as well as technical fundamentals with our students. In the technical lessons, we make sure that we cover industry and lab safety, vocabulary and jargon used in the industry, industry-specific measurement, drawing, drafting, and design, and soft and professional skills. Plans are underway to make sure that we are able to offer video stream demonstrations, industry-provided instructional videos, as well as vetted free source industry videos. The projects that we plan on doing with students are more computer-based simulations, industry-specific research and writing projects, and projects utilizing items students may have at home. Next slide, please. For work-based learning, the state has provided flexibility in how we deliver and record and keep data for those things. We can offer virtual delivery in lieu of normal face-to-face visits to industry level partners as well as college partners. They have reduced the work-based learning hours, which was normally 54 hours. They're going to reduce that for us. We have alternative dates and protocols for technical skill assessments. We have been working for the last 3 years on career plans and employability profile completions all online, which is best practices with state ed already. Next slide, please. With our participation from our industry and college partners, all of our partners are following our lead on delivery with each changing phase. Industry partners are already committed to virtual speaker series, virtual mentoring, virtual site visits, as well as the college partners who have offered dual enrollment courses virtually, virtual college visits, and they plan to work virtually with the teachers who are the professors for the programs that they teach for the collegiate level. That's all I have, Dr. Brown. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Rob. We appreciate that information on CTE. Going back to the other PowerPoint, Mike, thank you. If we can advance to the next slide. Well, I want the board members to know and the public to know that throughout the school year, we will have additional public meetings. We had a total of about 16 public meetings. We're going to hold additional public meetings, especially when we begin the transition to a hybrid model, to a gradual hybrid model. We want to collect additional feedback from parents in the community, and we want to inform them on what the hybrid model transition will look like. We will have additional surveys out also. So we are right now compiling information to conduct a student survey about remote learning and what they feel about a hybrid model. So once we get that survey finalized, we plan on launching it next week to get student input. And we will also have a mechanism for parents to request that their kids remain on home remote learning throughout the first semester. So some parents have indicated they don't want their children returning to school and they would like them to remain on remote learning. So we will have a mechanism for parents to elect that their students remain on remote learning for the entire first semester, even when we begin the transition to a hybrid model. Next slide. So now, board members, is the time we can answer any questions you may have. Mr. Petrucci, I will turn the meeting back over to you. Thank you very much. And we can end the PowerPoint so we can see everyone's face. And we have cabinet members here and division heads who are able to answer your questions, board members.
Thank you, Dr. Brownhall. I'm just going to go in reverse order from the last time. So from the people that called in, so I'll just call out each board member's name. And if you have any questions, please raise them at this time. We're going to start with Hope J. Hope, do you have any questions?
And not at this time, Lou, but I'm going to listen to what other people have to say, and I may have some afterwards.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. J. Dr. Evans-Brown, do you have any questions?
Betticelli mentioned that family liaisons were going to be assigned to each student. My question is, these district employees, and are we talking about every student, including the ELL students? And then my second question.
Let's answer the first one first so we can get full answers for your questions. Ann?
Yes, so it's a family liaison. So if you have multiple students at one school, you would have one staff member assigned to be your liaison for your family. And it might be a teacher assistant, it might be a teacher, it could be an SST member. Schools were able to determine who would be the most appropriate contact.
Okay, great. Attendance, how are we tracking attendance this semester?
That's a very good question. And our attendance meeting is tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, if I'm not mistaken. I know the associate superintendents, along with Tanja, along with Ann, they've been working on that, making sure we have our attendance protocols outlined. We'll be finalizing those tomorrow because we do have to take daily attendance. The state is requiring that, and we assured them that when we checked off our assurances when we submitted our reopening plan.
Okay, I thought that form that Myra developed earlier in the last semester was a good
the student tracker form. Yep, the student tracker form that the IT helped develop, that was a good template. But now, since we are going to be using Infinite Campus and have to take daily attendance, we want to make sure we're utilizing Infinite Campus in that manner so we can pull the data out quickly because we'll need that for state reporting.
Perfect. Thank you. That's all I had.
Thank you very much, Dr. Evans-Brown. Board Member Mikosi, do you have any questions?
I do. I have a couple. Thank you. So I want to kind of talk about the liaison as well, only because I'm wondering, is this liaison also going to be in tune with, PT, OT, and speech, and can give us any updates on I don't know if this question is for Ms. Betticelli or Ms. Holscher, but I might be looking into a family liaison myself. So I'm wondering whether or not that's someone who I would look out to, or would I have to, go through the hotline or go through the special education kind of, direction in order to find what I need.
So the liaison could be any staff member at a building that is connected to the family or to the particular child. They might not be an expert in special education. It's probably best if you had questions related to special ed to contact the CSE chair or the special education teacher. But the liaison would be able to support you with more general types of supports and could also connect you with the right people. So if a parent wasn't sure who they should be talking to, the liaison would give them the number of the right person to speak to related to that.
And Ann, can I add as well that we have a website set up specifically for any questions that you may have about special education. It's spedquestions@buffaloschools.org, spedquestions @buffaloschools.org. And parents, staff members, anyone can email us at that address. And I'm looking at that every day, as well as Nicole Donegan and Robin Tate, who are the two directors of special ed. We're maintaining that by the three of us, so you'll get a pretty immediate answer.
Thank you so much. My next question is my last, is more for Myra. So I had gone to, and right now my vehicle's out of commission, so I've been trying to get to South Park as often as I can. And both times I've gone, the line has been like out the door, and I was told that some folks were not able to, who had been standing in line, were, the time was up to be there, and they were asked to come back another day. I didn't want to use my board status and try and jump the line, you know what I mean? So I kind of laid low. I'm in that situation now where I want to switch my device for my son. He's going into 5th grade, and his iPad is not keeping a charge. So this is like for myself, but for other folks too. What is the process if, say, you go multiple times and you're not able to, really get the device, or you don't have a couple hours to stand in that line. Is there a way we can set up an appointment or parents can do that? I know I might have a little bit more, of an in here, but other folks may not, and I'm responding basically to them.
Absolutely, Ms. McCosey. In some of our live virtual meetings, we have received questions where people have exceptional circumstances. So what I've asked is that they can email me directly at myburden@buffaloschools.org, and we will try to accommodate them in those unique circumstances. For example, we did have a parent who was able to stand outside, but she was not able to stand inside due to her personal health condition. So we are going to accommodate her personally so that we can bring the device out to her or have her come at a time that is not as crowded. I will say that some of the reason that the lines are so long is because we are trying to adhere to social distancing guidelines as well as the safety measures. Right now, we are utilizing our student technology leaders to help us facilitate this process, and then they are on a, specific start and end time for working with us and for us. We hope to have a little more flexibility as we move along, and in part, those are the reasons why we've made the extended time frames for today and tomorrow. But if there are unique circumstances, or we have parents that have continually stood in line and we're not able to make it inside, they can definitely reach out to me directly, and I will work with them to make sure that they get the device they need, and they don't keep having to go through standing in line and never getting their student's device.
I thank you for that, and I do want to point out that I did mention that the social distancing and the way the line was set up, I appreciate and applaud how you've been. Yes, you're fine. I'm sorry. Go ahead. That you've been doing what needs to be done, and that it has been extended. I just want to make sure that the public can hear that as well. So I will make sure that folks who reach out to me know what you had just said too, and I'll be reaching out to you myself.
Already got you. Okay.
All right. Thank you, Ms. McCosey. Dr. Rivera, do you have any questions?
Yes, I have several. Thank you very much. My first question has to do with the timeline for student schedules in terms of when they need to log on, when those synchronous sessions are going to start up, and what kind of preparation that parents would need to do in order to get their students ready and in front of the camera.
Sure. So every school and every student will actually have a different schedule. Like I can just make general statements. So on the 8th, a student will have some synchronous and some asynchronous instruction at most buildings, although I do know there might be some that are doing a special day to open the school year, but schools will be reaching out. I believe they're doing mailings this week to let parents know exactly what to expect on the first day. I know that my daughter's school has also sent out meeting invitations to parents to virtually learn more about the reopening. So I think every school will be contacting families this week and sharing that information. And again, it's a full day of instruction, whether some of it is asynchronous or synchronous. So they should expect to have a regular schedule.
Okay. Okay, I was wondering because it's Wednesday the 2nd, we're talking about Monday, so I want to be sure. I know parents want to hear that information. That's part of their concern, because parents are really, they want to make sure that their children are supported, engaged, and ready to go with this. And this is too. I have a related question about that, is about how will students be trained to use remote learning, because it is a new skill, especially working asynchronously, working synchronously. Are there plans in place to work with that and make that a part of the curriculum early so students can really become acclimated to the kinds of shifting and work that they need to do?
There are actually lessons built into the first 2 weeks of instruction for every student to be prepared to use different platforms and understand the functions. So many of our students were already using Schoology, so they're very familiar with the platform, but maybe in a more generic sense. Teachers were going through mandatory training this week about Schoology so that they know pretty much every function there is and can answer questions as they come up. But we're providing them with some lessons to help acclimate the students.
And are students and teachers being supported in behavioral expectations when they're on a synchronous session? It's not an easy skill, as most of us have figured out as professionals, learning how to be on camera, how to think about yourself on camera, how to interact with a large group of people on camera.
I do know that teachers are going to be rethinking their behavioral expectations because you're right, it is different in a virtual world. Some of it will be a little bit of a learning curve in the very beginning, but I know teachers are thinking about that because they're very aware that, you know, based on what they experienced in the spring and the training that they've been receiving, they're very aware that this is a new world and that they need to be clear with their expectations.
Okay, thank you. And then these are all interrelated, so I appreciate you taking the time with me on this. I'm also curious about, so I'm thinking a lot about that ramp up time. You can probably see that all of these questions are related in that way. And I'm curious how grades, attendance, and absences will be handled in this period as students are getting used to being online. I could see conceivably a student intends to come to this synchronous session and then suddenly says, oh no, I just realized I'm late for it. It's going to be a while for students to get used to this because the immediate motivator of coming to the school building, coming to the front door, having your teachers right there supporting you all along the way, they're going to do that virtually. I know that. But it's different for students. So will there be any modification along those lines about how absences are counted, about how they affect grades, how grades are looked at in this period?
I don't want to be premature and speak to the attendance policy that isn't, officially released at this point. But during the first couple of weeks, we are not taking grades because we're going to be focused on social emotional learning, on supporting students, helping them access the platforms. So that
Thank you. I appreciate that. And then let's see, my last two. Oh, I was curious about the liaisons. I really like this idea. I find that an extra layer of support, and I think it has a really strong potential to help support our students and our families. I'm curious if when the liaisons will start to reach out, is the plan to look at who's attending in the beginning? Is there a timeline? Will the liaisons start reaching out if they notice that students and families are struggling? Or will they probably start right away?
Sure. I'm not exactly sure how many students are on each caseload, I guess, for lack of a better word, for a liaison, because it'll be different by building. It will also depend which staff members they have tapped on the shoulder to be a family liaison. So it's hard to say how long it might take them to get through all their initial calls at the very beginning. But I know that's part of our effort in the first 2 weeks is to really try to reach out. And I'm sure that they'll be immediately contacting families of students who don't show up the first couple days because they're going to want to know if there is a need for Wi-Fi, is there a need for a device, is there confusion? So I'm speaking on behalf of the principals, and I'm sure the ASLs might want to chime in, but that would be the family I would target first.
Okay, that's really helpful. I'd like to just I'd just like to advocate also when you're working on the attendance policy to just take into account how absences in attendance might be affected by tech issues as well. I'm sure you're already doing that. I just think it's something that needs to be reiterated as much as possible. So thank you for all that. And then
I was going to say, over the summer, we actually allowed, if we could prove that there was a technology issue for the student, we marked them absent exempt. So we were able to say there's a reason for this. It was sort of similar to an excused absence.
That's very good to hear. Thank you. And then my last one is about along the lines of supports for students. I know there was some talk in the reopening presentations, and I know that parents gave this feedback in several places about drop-in centers, about different modifications for telehealth, and also there's been an ongoing conversation about childcare and other support for parents. Is there any information you could share with us about that?
So hi, this is Dr. Brownhall. So if we could, I know that we are expecting, you received a communication yesterday that you all, so if we can just a little bit for that, because there will be more information later this week coming out about that, all right?
That's helpful to know. The timeline is so important, so saying it is coming later this week is a really helpful thing. Okay. And that concludes my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rivera. Board Member Hurd, you are up next.
I have a couple of questions. And please, you've been doing a wonderful job putting everything together. I hate to complain. Please don't look at me in a strange way, but I have to complain about something.
Then
Everybody, I have to complain about something.
I can't answer because, okay.
Yeah, I've been on some calls with youth. I've been on calls with elderly church groups, and we've been talking. So I got to complain now. The terminology. When we talk about synchronous and asynchronous learning, these people do not understand. They do not get it. The wording is very difficult for an elder to understand and to work with their grandchildren or children inside at home. You know,
I'm sorry, I can't hear you right now, but we can definitely use terms that might be more accessible, like real-time instruction or live virtual instruction and attendance instruction.
Hold on.
It will promise.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I hate to be the one to complain about it, but they're having a difficult time adjusting to the terminology of the wording. And I mean, it took a long time to explain the difference between a Zoom and a video call. And I'm trying to explain it's the same thing, but conceivably, it's hard for some older people to get it, and even younger people also. So I understand that the coaching and everything, some things we're gonna go over next week, but just the terminology and the usage of the names. When you get at the parents, it's something new. It's a word that I haven't heard before until a couple of weeks ago, and now we're trying to bring this out to the district. And if it's some way that we can try to put a play on words or something like that, so that it'd be better understanding of the differences.
Sure. Whenever we use the word synchronous, I always try to say live virtual instruction, but I can be more consistent. And when we talk about asynchronous, I can use the word independent work. I can be more consistent with that.
Okay, these parents are having, some are having trouble with virtual learning or the difference between virtual learning and in-person learning. It's simple terminologies, but if you never did it before, if you never experienced this type of teaching before or learning, and now parents are actually becoming teachers, it's hard for them to understand, exactly, what's the next step, and confusing on that step, can be detrimental to the rest of the year in learning because they might just, give up or might not have the base of going forward. And that's just one statement. Next, also, we talked about having a coach, so family liaison, and you also talked about
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Potato chips, it sounds like. Reading potato chips, can you please put your phone on mute? How are we going to address this with the family liaison about working with parents who may speak different languages or just come into the country. We have parents we know that have been at meetings that have been very silent, supposed to have translators there with them, and the translators really didn't do their job and explain to them, what was being portrayed at that meeting and what was the message and things like that. And they look just as puzzled and confused sitting in this couple of meetings that I've been to. So how can we ensure that we can assign some translators or family liaisons to those families so they can try to keep up with the education?
So I'm going to let Mrs. Nasher answer this one, but we do use talking points, and we've been continually trying to train administrators and teachers in the use of that. And we do have interpreters and interpreters available, but I'm going to ask Mrs. Nasher to answer this one.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Hurd. So in terms of the family training on how to communicate with families, not only multilingual families, but all families. And within that training, we provided a script of, how to open up conversations with families. We provided a structure, just because, it's difficult to have a conversation with families, especially if that is not a norm or that's not something you're comfortable with. And also because of COVID, right? We know we've all experienced some emotional things during COVID, so we want to be sensitive to our families. So that's one thing, is we provided structure, we provided some sentence frames, if you will. We also provided our families, our teachers, with how to enter information into Infinite Campus. I worked with David Hills and Mike Hume to create a system where all this data that we're gathering, for example, do you have the food that you need? Are there any mental or health issues that you're concerned with? Do you have one-to-one devices? Our family liaisons can enter that information into Infinite Campus, and our principals can print out an ad hoc report so that they can clearly see an overview of what families need what, and they could address it immediately. Also, part of that structure is that the last thing is that the family liaison is asked to make a consistent date and time with the family. So they say, okay, is this a good day and good time that we can meet? Is it every Monday at 7 o'clock? So those structures will help all students, right? But we know that it is essential for multilingual learners. And so in the off our teacher or our family are able to look up the child's name and the parent's preferred language. And it says Bengali or Spanish, they are to use the many resources that we have in the district. So they are to use Language Line, they are to use the teacher assistants in the building, they are to reach out to our department for cultural resource specialists. So I do thank you, Dr. Hurd, or Mr. Hurd. You're always an advocate for multilingual learners, and you always surprise us when you come to our meetings, and we just really thank you for always, bringing that up, like, hey, don't forget the multilingual learners. And so thank you for that question.
Thank you. Thank you for your work. The next question is going to technology. I have a lot of families right now, because the governor's order for paying rent is over now. A lot of families lost their jobs, and they're applying for disability insurance. And so a lot of them are being evicted from their homes this month. This is the time they get paid back. Is it just late? Okay, they're losing their homes right now, and so some are being homeless. Some people are going to shelters. Some people are moving with other families and things like that. So, how do we? I'm not quite sure, but I know I told the families that I spoke with to reach out to the district to call in on a call-in number to make sure that they can receive a tablet or a hotspot where they may not have access to it. So. How do we as a district reach out to those families to make sure that they stay in tune with school and education? I know it's hard to find people if they're not responsive or calling the district and let them know where they're at or how to reach the children. But this also goes hand in hand with our food program. How are our kids receiving food during this time period, breakfast and lunch, and I understand that we was supposed to supply meals still, for the families. But I just want that information to be more accurate. So if we put this information out, that we can tell them.
So we have received some requests from some of the representatives for agencies and some of the shelters, and they have been providing names of students that potentially need devices. So we can facilitate the issuance of a device or a hotspot through those representatives. We have also worked with the MLL department. So once we started the device distribution, we did hand out flyers at the food distribution sites to assist with getting the word out in terms of where to come to pick up a device, as well as a hotspot. As Nadia mentioned earlier, the cultural specialists were at the device distribution site to help facilitate conversations with those families so that they understood what they needed to do with the device and if they needed a hotspot. So to try to bridge that gap of understanding in terms of if you come here and you get a device, you also need to have internet access to go with it. And then what does that mean? So that they would understand if they needed to leave there with a hotspot. So we are trying to engage with different agencies or respond to requests for those students that are, the exception, not the norm. In terms of assisting with getting them the devices that they need. So anytime we get a request, we are making every effort to be intentionally responsive to assist with that, because we do want every student to have a device. And again, as I mentioned earlier, we are upwards towards probably about now 27,000 devices that are in the hands of students. As of this morning, that number that I gave was 26,000. As I mentioned earlier, we probably had upwards towards 1,000 devices that were given out today. Tomorrow is another extended day until 6:30, and we'll still be facilitating distribution throughout next week.
Okay, and we'll be utilizing our parent groups also with this type of distribution, like MVP, that said they will come out anytime, any day in the night to help out with the distribution of products and food.
Absolutely, if needed, yes.
Okay. My last question is, as Ann Rivera's talking about.
To follow up on your food question, important that we address that, because now we're going to be at 48 sites, and it'll be Monday, Wednesday, Friday food distribution. I don't know if Jim Weimer wants to add to that. Mike, can you unmute number 390-5222? 390-5222. That's Jim Weimer. Maybe he can add about the food distribution.
Thanks, Darren. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. The other day, the USDA has changed and put us back into emergency food distribution mode, and we will be distributing 7 days a week meals. So Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, we will be providing 7 days of meals to our families at, I believe we're around 50 sites or so throughout the system. So we're not just doing the 28 sites anymore, but we have expanded throughout the city, and we will be monitoring that for distribution and how we can adjust that moving forward.
Okay, thank you. That's wonderful news, and I'm glad to hear that. Will all these sites be Buffalo Public School sites? Will they be community centers or any other facilities?
For the time being, we're using our district sites. But as I said, Bridget O'Brien Wood, our food service director, will be monitoring, food needy areas and adjusting to service those areas.
Thank you, Mr. Weimer. And the last question, I know it's late. The last question I had was At this time, parents are going to be working. Sometimes parents are not going to be home. Sometimes parents are going to be frustrated and need breaks. And I truly believe that older children in the household or older neighbors are going to be babysitting kids and watching kids during this time period, during educational lessons. Sometimes you may have a neighbor or a relative that can come in and help out, with a younger child, with their education. And hopefully everybody's tested and not spreading the virus to one another during this time period. But this is going to happen. So my question is, if we got older kids helping out, which I spoke with some groups already, which just did this over the summer, and parents are going to be doing this during the school year. We got older kids helping out or babysitting younger kids and helping with their work, and their work is at the same time as the youth. So if it's at 9 o'clock and the older child have a lesson at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock or so on, how can we make some type of revocation for that? If a child doing 2 lessons at one time, their own work and another child's work. That's one of my big concerns.
And that's a good question.
I was just gonna say, I don't know that there's an easy answer for that.
Right.
But I think we did build asynchronous time into the schedule with some of that in mind, knowing that students will need breaks. They will need to work independently away from the screen at times. I know teachers want to be as flexible as possible, but at the same time, we are required to take attendance. So there has to be somewhat of a balance. Many teachers asked if they, what's the best way to videotape a lesson? So I know a lot of people are thinking about how they might do that to support their students as well. We'll also have a lot of work taking place in programs and online so that could be accessed at a different time.
Okay. Well, say if an older child is logging in at the same time with their little brother or sister, and they log in at the same time, and older child's responsible enough to try to do both. But can that person be penalized because now you got a child asking questions, they're leaving the classroom? I don't want that child to be victimized because they're trying to do dual responsibilities or be leaders in their home.
Right. But to Ann's point, Mr. Hurd, our teachers have said this time and time again, they realize they have to be flexible and, allow for some flexibility, but also, we still have to make sure students are learning. So that's why we encourage parents and students to talk with their teacher, let them know their situation, because as Ann said, teachers are looking to maybe videotape lessons so that students can watch them later, or, teachers are being very flexible because ultimately the parents, the board members, and the teachers want the students to learn. So they're not looking to penalize kids. They're looking to see how much they can help, how much they can be flexible so that students are learning.
That's great. I know that, sometimes when you fall behind in a class, it's hard to catch back up. It's hard to get that classwork and casework in. And videotaping the class, would be very helpful if they can find a way to do that to help the child out. Or even a week's worth of lessons. Okay.
Many teachers are going to be using features like Nearpod or PlayPosit, which allow them to create a lesson that can be watched again and again and again. So they might make that lesson and then it builds it in their resource box and the kids can come to it.
That would be great. That would be great. I wish we had that growing up and going to school. So
I know, me too.
Okay, I yield my time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hurd. Board President Sharon Belton Cotton, the floor is yours if you have any questions. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you. I just have a couple of questions. Some clarity on how do the paraprofessionals and the clerks and office personnel work into this formula?
So you mean how are they being utilized also?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. So the aides and the assistants are actually undergoing, participating and taking some training this week also in these 3 superintendent conference days so that they can be involved. And as Ann said earlier, many of them will work as family liaisons. Teacher assistants will also be assisting in the classroom. I know Myra in the IT department had a survey to survey the aides and assistants to see which ones need technical help or technology assistance, excuse me. So there's a lot that we're doing to make sure that they are integrally involved in school reopening. And so
Good.
we are making sure we do that.
About the clerks and the typists.
Well, the clerks and the typists are doing their regular duties in the school.
Doing their regular duties? Okay, good. Okay. So we had parent liaisons being utilized.
Yes, as a matter of fact, I'm not sure if Tanja is on here. I believe Tanja is the number 228-8895. Mike, if you could unmute that number, because I believe parent liaison is in very soon. Tanja?
Yes, yes, I am. Good evening, everyone. I'm pleased to say that Dr. Reynolds is working tirelessly right now to get our parent engagement liaisons all ready and set to support all of our families. The board passed the board recommendation at the last board meeting, so we will be all set to go. We will have our parent engagement liaisons all ready to go. Yeah.
Okay.
That went through the board last in the August meeting, correct, Dr. Williams?
Correct. Yes. Yes.
So I guess my question is one of, organizational concern. How are we going to monitor what these people are doing? In other words, we have someone who has a title of best practices as our title. And I'm just curious to know if we have set up some sort of a form or some sort of monitoring type of assistance our parents are requesting and need so that we can learn from it. Okay. Do you understand what I'm saying here?
I do. So I definitely know that, there are trainings that are planned to look at best practices. Some schools are doing a better job at utilizing their parent engagement liaisons than others. And we want to share, what those schools are doing, how, some parent engagement liaisons are able to mobilize and reach out to more parents. So I know that that's something that is definitely planned for this year. But currently, principals at every school have different needs. So although we will be looking at, what best practices, what's happening really good in some schools and how it can be duplicated in others, really principals are able to make sure that the needs of their schools, individually are being met. So they work closely in driving, how their parent engagement liaisons are utilized.
Well, I hear that on a regular basis, but I do feel that there's a need to establish some goals and some objectives for these people. And it should be uniform. It should be universal. Okay, not just liaisons, but we're talking about family liaisons. What type of situations are they encountering? How do we take that information and use it to better serve our parent body in general? Okay, and so what I'm concerned about is that everybody's doing their thing here, what works best for me, what works best, but somehow or another, when that type of system exists, children have a tendency to get, things have a tendency to fall through the crack. So what I'm saying is that if you have a family liaison, shouldn't there be some sort of an accounting system as to what they're doing with these people? I spoke to 5 families today. These were their concerns, or et cetera. I need to know that.
Absolutely, and I think we all agree that there have to be some baseline expectations, and then they can of course exceed and modify, on top of that. But baseline, yes, absolutely.
I think that needs to be across the district as general. Brown, I have a concern that, and maybe it exists, that there's not a checklist of these items have to be addressed by every school building that exists, and that there's a sign-off sheet that each principal signs off that they have addressed these issues. If we don't have that type of thing in place, you're going to see certain schools going to do it, you're going to see certain schools that may not do it. But I just want to make sure that as we start trying to develop this equity resolution that we put together, sure that certain things are being done equitably across the district. I mean,
Absolutely. I think
to
that's
be a
something
checklist
that
for any
Dr. Reynolds,
day.
yeah, I think, it's something that has already, we've been beginning discussions about. And I don't think that would be a heavy lift at all to set in place some baseline expectations, just at a basic level that we expect.
William, I'm not just talking about you. I'm talking about this. Why? I'm talking about what should be expected. A top 10
Right,
or
at every
20
school.
at every school. We had this
Yes.
conversation about something as simple as a code of conduct is not even listed when you come into a building, but certain schools have it. Go into, I think it's West Turtle, they have their code of conduct there, at least at one time it was. And so, moving forward and doing things in a more equitable way so that nothing falls through the crack. That's all.
I think Ramona is on the call and she wanted to share about the log and what's expected of the parent liaisons. Ramona, are you there?
Well, if she doesn't have it, she can send it to us. It's not a problem. But I'm also concerned about the family liaison going on with that. Okay, I really am concerned that the supports are put in place, that children are starting, that we're starting to see some universal practices in this district to make sure that all children have the same access to all things. That's all I'm trying to get to here, people. Not her, just trying to get to that.
Mrs. Cottman, in terms of the family liaison, we did provide them with a script, a gently scripted, I guess, talking points to use with families. And we are expecting that they will enter information in the parent communication tab in Infinite Campus so that principals can run reports. So we will be able to look at trends that we're seeing across buildings.
I really am concerned about making sure that we don't let anything fall through the cracks here. That's all.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Understood.
all. Question is, how are you monitoring? Yes.
Mrs. Cottman, it's Cassandra Wright. I wanted to address your statement about the standardization of some practices across the district.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I want you to know that we host principal meetings weekly, and we've started to host them not only weekly principal meetings, but office hour meetings. And a few weeks ago, we noticed that there were some things that really needed to be standardized across the district. Taking the input from the principals who spoke with their teachers and families and students, we did develop a checklist of items that must be done. And so those items include making sure that there's a parent liaison for every single, a family liaison for every single child family, making sure that there were schedules that would be posted, making sure that there were parent meetings and student meetings, making sure that the materials and supplies would be ready and appropriate, and someone would be available to have conversations with families when they needed to speak about what's going on with their child. So that list does exist. We'll be able to send you a version of it. I want you to say that there is a COVID-related checklist from the CDC, and my colleagues adapted that COVID-related checklist for Buffalo Public Schools. Once we put together a document, that project was led primarily by, I think it was Toya Wilson and Content Dabney, and actually all of them. Darlene Devanowski, David Hills, everyone had a say in that document. We pushed it out to the principals, and then the principals made it better because they know exactly what needs to be done in order to make this process of launching a 33,000 student online system seamlessly. They know what needs to take place and happen, and they also wanted to make sure that their counterparts, their principal colleagues, were all set and ready to go too. They made that document better. So we'll be more than happy to share that with you so you can get a glimpse of what we're doing to make sure that this system lives seamlessly on September 8th when children are ready to learn.
So then I also would expect that same conversation has been had by the guidance department as well as the our psychologists and our counselors. I would expect that department should also have a standard list or a list of checklists or something. because my concern across the board is making sure children do not fall through the crack during this process. And I'm very concerned because I had concerns about certain areas prior to this. So I'm very concerned about what the counselors are doing, what the psychologists are doing, what the SST teams are doing, you know, in the building. So I hope that list expands out for expectations for them. Expect for Martha Younger to provide some sort of a checklist for us, for her staff members also. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah, Mrs. Cotman, we can do that. Martha's been working very closely all summer with MyWin, with Kim Holscher and her teams. And so we can definitely share that with you.
I just think it's important that adults are accountable.
Absolutely.
What I'm saying.
Absolutely.
And don't sign off that they received this, because if it turns out that in the future that they did not get a copy of it, how can you hold them accountable? Did get a copy of it, then they are professionals. They should be held accountable. That's all. Thank you. It's for Kim Holsinger. I'm not sure what I attended, and I don't have my notes in front of me, but it was a conversation, special ed children, and that requirement that they receive, the children who, I'm saying this and please don't take offense to it, the children who left out, or children who did not receive the level of resources that they should have received in the spring, they are, or that they receive additional support moving forward. And I have the notes from the conference that I attended. And what they were saying is that in many of these cases, that these children we're supposed to find out how these children are and provide them with additional support happening in our district.
I missed the last part of that. I'm sorry, it broke up and I couldn't hear the last part of your question.
So basically what I'm asking is that children who are with the special need population, lost in the sauce, let's say it like that, okay, not receive the type of support they needed, received in a general year or whatever, I'm understanding in this seminar, and I do have my notes, and I can't pull them up, I just don't have them in front of me now, are entitled to receive additional support as a result of this.
Oh, sure. I know what you're referring to. You're referring to compensatory services.
Okay.
So in what that is and students are actually always entitled to that if a district fails to give them the services that are mandated on their IEP. But in this case, what we were required to do in the spring with closure is keep records of the services that students received and to make sure they were getting services, not necessarily exactly as on their IEP, because for example, when a student is home, we can't provide 611 services, right? We can't have 6 people in the class, but we did provide their IEP services as far as, you know, they were working with their teachers virtually. We had teletherapy delivered to services or to students for OT, PT, speech, vision, hearing. The social workers were doing counseling sessions with students. We did provide assistive technology. So we were providing to the greatest degree possible the services that were mandated on a student's IEP. And again, they didn't look exactly like they would have looked during a regular school year, but they were services that were matched to the greatest extent possible. Compensatory then comes into play when a parent believes that their student didn't get the services as mandated on their IEP.
And so have we checked, do we have any of those, or have we had any of those cases?
Not to date, we have not.
Okay, thank you. Just making sure. Thank you so much for taking my questions and answering them, people. Thank you for the work you're doing.
Thank you very much, President Kottman. Next is Paulette Woods. Member Woods, you have the floor. Do you have any questions?
I just have one question about the families that have multiple students, 5 or 6 children in the house. How many
devices are they allowed to have? What did she say? I thought I heard her say something about just one per household, but I know that can't be because you'd have kids fighting. I have 14 brothers and sisters, so you know how that goes.
That was one hotspot per family. Was when Myra spoke about one, she meant one hotspot per family, so they have the connectivity. Because one hotspot, I believe, is to like 6 or 7 devices.
That is correct, dear. They are 4G hotspots that we are giving out.
So how many, is there a cap? If you have 5 children in your family, do each of them get a laptop or are they forced to share? Is there any direction on that?
For the laptop, no, for the laptops, it is 1-to-1. The district moved to a 1-to-1 model back in 2017. So all students in grades 3 through 12 have a 1-to-1 device. So each child has a device. We have distributed devices for students in grades 2 on a 1-to-1 model, giving an iPad to every student in grade 2. Through the Smart Schools Emergency Funding, we now have the financial resources to support buying iPads for all of the students in grades pre-K through 1. Those devices are on order and are estimated to ship between mid to late September. And once they actually ship, I'll be able to get a more definitive estimate on when they will be delivered. But we will be able to outfit all students at that point, pre-K through 1, who aren't currently being issued a device with a device in a 1-to-1 model.
Do we have any responsibility for the 9,000 public charter children?
No. We don't have responsibility for their schools are responsible for providing their technology needs. We do not have any responsibility for that.
Thank you for that answer.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Board Member Woods. That brings up your humble meeting chair. I do have a few questions, though, not in any particular order, but I had a few parents reach out to me regarding transportation for fall sports. Many of these children are paying out of their pocket to get to their practices. They're wondering if the district's going to provide bus passes and how and when will their children receive them?
What fall sports?
Soccer.
And that, you know what, that's a great question, and we'll have to take that under consideration.
Okay. Just because they're saying it's costing their children $5 a day. So they were a little concerned. Next, this would be for Myra. Myra, I have 2 questions. I was wondering if you could provide us an update with respect to the devices for the pre-K to 2nd grade students. I know that's something we mentioned a couple weeks ago. I know they're on order. I know we're expanding. Do we have any updates as to when people can expect them? Did they come in yet? Where are we at with them?
So for the 2nd grade students, we've taken the iPads that we have on hand, and we've invited all 2nd grade students in to pick up an iPad device. Those will be distributed 1-to-1 for all 2nd grade students. We have placed an order that consists of about 9,700 iPads to support a 1-to-1 model for pre-K through 1st grade students. Those devices are estimated to ship mid to late September. They are shipping them on a first in, first out basis, based on the orders they've received from other customers they may have. And once they actually ship, I will be able to get a more definitive date in terms of an estimated delivery to the district.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that very much. Next, with respect to connectivity, on the first day of school, will all of our kids be connected? If not, can you give us kind of a ballpark figure? What do you think? 97, 98%? Are you hazard to guess? Are you smiling? How do you think we're going to go?
Well, we have gotten a decent response. As parents and students are coming through to pick up their devices, if they indicate a need for a hotspot, we have been able to provide them with that hotspot at that point in time. We have done an analysis with Spectrum to determine who we believe has internet access and who does not. The number of hotspots that we have been able to provide does not equate to what we think may be the digital divide or the gap. But as I mentioned earlier, we are continuing to work with Spectrum to try to see if we can get to a happy medium on this deal. The mayor's office is involved, and in the interim, we have hotspots if a parent or student expresses a need. So I would be reluctant to say that it's going to be good. I don't think we're at 100%, but we do have things in place to support the need once the need is expressed. I'm not concerned about our ability to meet the need. I'm more concerned about the ability to for the parents to get to us to let us know there is a need.
All right. Thank you very much. That's a good answer. Yes, Terrence. Terrence, you had a question? We can't hear you. We can't hear you, Terrence.
Is there going to be a dress policy with the remote learning?
A dress policy?
Yes.
Dress policy.
No,
Well,
go ahead, Myra.
I was just going to say that as part of the student handbook, we did include guidance to encourage parents to make students presentable if they are going to be interfacing with teachers. I can't speak to a policy, but we did include in our handbook a recommendation to make sure that students are appropriately dressed once they engage through that video conferencing with their teacher.
Okay.
Yes,
Sharon.
I'm sorry. If a teacher deems that a student is inappropriately dressed or maybe wearing something that's maybe a little showing, how's that going to be addressed?
Teachers talk to those students and they explain appropriate dress when they're on a Microsoft Teams meeting. So teachers have a lot of experience talking with kids, and they talk to them about what's appropriate. And if that doesn't work, then the teacher will talk to the parent of that child.
Okay, but it might be before a group of kids. So I just wanted to,
like in the regular classroom, right? Teachers know how to do those things with tact.
Okay.
Mr. Pacucci, very quickly, I just contacted our assistant superintendent of athletics, and she said there are no teams practicing.
Okay. I'll let that parent know. Thank you very much, Darren.
Absolutely.
Next, the next question I had, did I see other hands up before we move on? I just want to make sure.
Dr. Evans Brown,
Jennifer's hand has been up for a while.
Okay, Jennifer, I can't see her hand. I don't see her photo.
No.
You have a particular question, Jennifer?
Yes, muted.
You're muted, Jennifer.
Question is for Ms. Nashir. Do you reach out to the community-based organizations and the leaders of those folks in order to help with communication? Is there like a strategy or something in place around that? I know we have the parent liaisons and the whole nine. I actually received a couple texts that folks are trying to reach out to the district because they represent hundreds of, in this case in particular, Burmese and Sudanese folks that I received 2 texts, or else I would have just brought it on email. But we have folks that are willing to, bring folks into their district, into their groups, and communicate this on a deeper level. I don't know if that's in place already. I just want to say publicly, I want to see what's being done so that can be addressed.
I thought Nadia had addressed that earlier, but I don't know if Nadia is still on the line.
Board Member McCosey, this is Dr. Williams. And I just want to share that on August 31st, we convened a meeting with a little over 100 of our community partners so that we could share with them what the reopening plan entailed, hear a little bit about, you know, some of their expertise and how they could help to leverage all of the supports that they're willing to offer us. So we just had that kind of meeting on August 31st.
Okay, I just wanted to be sure that the public knew, because this is what I was receiving during this meeting, and, you know, it was multiple folks, so I just want to make sure they knew that something like this occurred. And if they have any further questions, I'll direct them to give you guys a call. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
A couple more questions. Does the district have guidance as to when a child can be left alone? Is there an age range? Do we have noting childcare? Many parents are going to have to go back to work. So I've heard from a couple different parents that they want to know when it's appropriate to leave a child by themselves.
Their household?
Their household, correct.
Yeah, I don't, we have not given any guidance like that to parents, and I would caution that we, you know, stay away from something like that. So no, we have not given any guidance like that to parents. We would not advise parents something of that nature.
Okay, thank you, Darren. Next, I know Kim was very nice to explain about how they're going through and getting all these surveys from all of our special education parents. One of the concerns that's been raised to me by many of my special ed and ELL parents is that they feel that they don't get as effective instruction remotely. And they were just wondering when we were going to have a decision as to when kids can go back to small classrooms and in-person learning.
Well, that of course may not be up to us, right? It'll be up to a judge tomorrow. So, I mean, after 4 to 6 weeks, we said what we would do is reevaluate the remote learning and then decide just get the BPS on board, realizing that our schools of our teachers then transitioning back also.
Right.
Not allowed.
I can't believe what this board president said about my position.
Excuse me.
Said you should go to the union.
Hello, who's talking?
Whoa, someone doesn't have their phone on mute.
Wow.
So, that is our plan for 4 to 6 weeks to still transition to a hybrid model or look to transition. We're going to look at all the data, talk to our medical director, talk to our health advisory panel, and see if that's a proper time in 4 to 6 weeks to begin a gradual transition to a hybrid model. Again, a lot will determine on what happens in the court tomorrow when we get a decision, because the BTF is attempting to stop teachers reporting to school.
Yeah, Darren, the reason we're asking is because the governor said that children in those populations could go back to school early. I think that's what's the basis for their question.
Say it one more time, Mr. Petrucci.
That the governor had issued a previous order saying that children that were in small classrooms, 811 classrooms or ELL populations could return to their classrooms earlier because they were smaller classrooms, because they had the social distancing, et cetera.
You remember, I did a to the board in August. I explained that in our transition to a hybrid model, we would be looking to make sure that if we have those smaller classes, 611, 811, 1211, where they can remain socially distant because of the size of their classrooms, we were looking in our progression to a hybrid model to have those students returning first. So that's something that we're still considering, and with the younger grades, you know, in the hybrid model. So when we transition to a hybrid model, these are all the things we're thinking of.
All right, that was it. Oh, one more thing. I'm sorry. I've received quite a few calls and emails about the cut in staffing to the drop-in center. That it's my understanding that many of these kids are going to be returned or transferred to other high schools to get their instruction. That the district at one time maintained teachers on location at the drop-in center, and that program's been cut.
I am not aware of that. I am not aware of that. I can look into that, but I will find out.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any other questions from the board?
Kathy Evans, and then I have a question.
Okay.
I want to provide some information that I found out this morning from our housing director. I do work for the Urban League. There's a moratorium on evictions through the end of this year. So funds will be coming from the state and local government next week and will be available to people who need the information or need the funds. And as long as they can provide a related reason, for not paying their rent or mortgage due to COVID-19. And one of the other questions I had was talk about all of these CBOs, including Say Yes. Who's going to be responsible for coordinating all of those CBOs? Because that's going to be a huge undertaking. I know that I work for the Buffalo Urban League, so my staff do go out to homes, for example. My background includes child protection work for over 20 years. And I know that when we talk about accountability, right, and at what needs are necessary in the home, we make sure that parents sign off that the person made the contact. So that's a form of accountability. So I guess my question is, who's going to be responsible for all that coordination?
I will say this, and I'm sure other colleagues want to chime in, but we did mute everyone because we're towards the end of the end of the night. So I muted everyone, and I can just speak very quickly. So Dr. Tasha Williams, her department handles a lot of the coordination with the CBOs because they do a lot of the supports. And as she stated earlier, they did hold a meeting earlier this week with the CBOs to make sure they have the information that the district, what the district is doing, and we can get information from them. It's, a back and forth with information share. And then for many of our other CBOs, we'll be working with whomever takes over the position that Ann Fitzgerald had in our community school grant funding, because Ann's last day was Monday, and we will be looking to fill that position.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
President Kottman, you have a question?
I'm just curious. So is between K through 1, it's K through 1, do they start on the 8th or do they start at a later date?
No, they start on the 8th also. They do start on the 8th.
What does that look like if the kids don't have handheld devices?
And Ann, if you can chime in, because I believe they are putting together the packets for those students.
Learning packets actually were delivered to the service center today, and they were being shipped out to schools today and tomorrow.
So if the kids don't have devices, what are they supposed to use? Just turn on the internet, their own computers? How do we connect to the children? That's what I'm trying to get to here.
Right. So in the very beginning, some of those kids may not have a device in the home, which is why we're providing the learning packets. But as Myra said earlier, we do think that the devices will be arriving late September. So there won't be that enormous a time lag. And in the meantime, teachers will be contacting the families to make sure that they understand how to access the packets, what content is available to them. And some families do have personal devices.
They have their own personal devices. They can use those. I want to make that clear.
Yep, you could use a mobile phone. You could use a tablet. You could use a personal desktop or laptop.
The final thing I just want to share with the board is about the food, the lunches, the meals, the breakfasts. We need to encourage people to get more food out. We typically do average day about close to 30,000 meals in this district. We've been down to about 10,000. We cannot sustain our staffing if we don't continue to increase with our food distribution. So I want people to try to make sure that we work collectively to make sure that people are going to the schools to get the food, and that they reach out to Bridget and her team to if they want community sites and things like that, so that we can increase our food distribution. It's very important for our district. We get paid per lunch, okay? Per meal, we get paid.
Are there any other questions, board members? I know, no? I saw this little movement. I just want to make sure. We've had a long day of each other's company. A lot of good questions, a lot of good reports. Any other questions? Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second? Second? We have lots of seconds. It's a unanimous vote. All right. Good night, everybody. Thank you very much.
Good night.